right. Hello. So this is going to be a recap of Porcfest 2021. I did a kind of a very last minute pregame of that event, and it was the largest Porcfest ever, so they say. I couldn't really tell looking at it. You don't get a good sense of the total population when you're just going through the campground. But according to the sales, they sold more tickets than they ever did. There's a lot of people who don't buy tickets and a lot of people who come who bring others with them, and people will crash. So who knows how many people were really there. I believe they said they sold 2,500 tickets. So you can set that at a minimum number of the people who were there. But I attended, as I've been attending the last couple years. And it was great. Now, it was a little bit different for me this year because rather than just go and attend the events, typically when I've gone in the past, I haven't had anything that I was really working on. I wasn't manning a booth or an event or anything like that. And so I was able to devote all of my time to going to the talks, to the lectures, to socializing. And this year I had something that I was working on, so I wasn't able to really do that. But the people who were there as speakers was like an all-star list. We had Dave Smith, Scott Horton, Robbie the Fire Bernstein, Tom Woods, Bob Murphy, Jeffrey Tucker, David Friedman. Stephen Kinsella was there. I don't know if he was speaking or not. And they're probably going to forget some other people, but like almost everyone who's gone in the last couple of years. And I noticed that a lot of these guys were going and staying for a lot longer than just their events. And I've noticed this with David Friedman for a long time. You know, he shows up there. He usually has a speech like on Friday or Saturday, but he was there on Monday or Tuesday and there all week. Dave Smith wasn't there all week, but for many days. Same with Tom Woods. Like a lot of these people seem to really enjoy the event, enjoy going to it, and it's really morphed over the years to something that has something for everybody. So for me, though, it was a little bit different because I ended up, on the prompting of one of my subscribers, actually building and running a communal shower facility there, something that I might have to do an independent video on because it was an interesting experience. But it ended up kind of diverting me from being too active with everything else. So the only lectures, I only went to one or two lectures, and kind of the only like flagship event is I did make time and find a couple minutes, maybe half an hour to talk with Scott Horton, who was probably the number one draw for me anyway. I know he maybe isn't the most famous person, but he was the most influential for my development and somebody who I wanted to see for a long time. He was scheduled to come last year, didn't make it due to COVID, and I think there was also some kind of misunderstanding about airfare or something like that. But he was there this year, gave a couple talks, and then was very active with the Mises caucus. And that's something I guess I should point out too. Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, some of you are not, but apparently there was a lot of drama with the Mises caucus and the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire in the weeks just immediately before Porcfest. And you know, I don't have any inside baseball there, guys. I'm not in the Libertarian Party, and I'm not part of the Mises Caucus, even though as somebody who was forever influenced much more by the Mises Institute than I was by, say, Cato or Reason. Not to denigrate those organizations. I think they do a lot of good, but you know, the heart and soul of my political ideology really comes much more from Mises Rothbard and Ron Paul than it does from Ed Crane or David Boaz or any of those picks. Not to diminish some of the great work that they've done, but the Mises Caucus was had a large tent. Seemed like the happening place to be. There were always a lot of people there, and it did seem like most of these celebritarians, Horton, Smith, some of the others, were really kind of focused on that event, kind of hanging around at that tent with those people most of the time. I always have a difficult time with these celebritarians in the sense that like they're often getting mobbed. People are really spending a lot of time with them. I kind of compare it to barnacles on a whale, and I don't like to feel like a barnacle, so I kind of just always give them their space, and unless it just organically happens on accident, I don't tend to talk to them. Again, I made an exception for Scott Horton, and I ended up just kind of listening to him talk for a while, and then taking a minute when there was a free moment and started to interject and had a nice little conversation with him. Nothing groundbreaking, but just a nice chance to connect with somebody who was really important to my intellectual development. But that was pretty much it. I didn't go to any of the other big events. I obviously met a lot of new friends and a lot of old friends. As always, met a couple subscribers. Interestingly enough, met some subscribers in the shower completely randomly, which is kind of a cool thing to do. But as far as I know, the event went really well. I didn't hear any complaints about overregulation. This was one of the problems that was talked about at Porcfest up to 2019. So as Porcfest got bigger and bigger and bigger, it started off as a very informal event. And I'm getting this from the history. I wasn't going to the first Porcfest. I think the first Porcfest I went to was Porcfest 10, probably. I think this was Porcfest 19. It started off as just a couple people camping together, and every year more and more people started coming. And at some point, I'm not sure when, but at some point early on, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 6, they started having things like vendors and formal events, and these got bigger and bigger and bigger. Free Talk Live promoted it a huge amount, which is how I ended up hearing about it and deciding I wanted to go. By the time I went, I think the first year I went was in 2012, which I think was around the 10th year that they'd had it. It was a large event, and there were lots of organized speakers, lots of organized booths, lots of food. Of course, in those years, I think in 2011, 2012, I think Bitcoin had really taken it by storm. Bitcoin is still a part of Porcfest for sure, but it's not like the intellectual debating heart of it. In 2012, almost every lecture, it seemed like there were panels about it, comparing it to gold. Whatnot, and some of those people I just saw. I mean, I remember meeting Eric Voorhees there, and I just saw Reason interviewed him a few days ago about his activities in the crypto market since then. But it grew. But as it grew, it became more and more formal and more organized. Now, it's still a libertarian event, so you don't want to overemphasize the degree of that. The organizers never exercised enormous power or control over what was happening. But ever so slightly more and more. And it got to the point where you needed a permit. They wanted you to get a permit if you were going to sell any food or if you were going to have a booth. They wanted you to be limited to certain areas. The way the campground is laid out, it's a little different than you would expect. The epicenter of the event is not the middle of the campground. The epicenter of the event is the very northern edge of the campground where the main facilities are. And every row of camping spots beyond that, you kind of get farther and farther from the center. Not that there aren't locuses of activity there, but that's the main nexus. And they were, at one point, requiring people to pay $500 to have a spot on the so-called Agora Alley, the alley where most of the commerce was happening, or at least most of the best established businesses. And there were people who were getting upset with this. The other thing is they were getting more ideologically exclusive, and so there was a lot of political infighting with Ian Friedman of Free Talk Live, who, again, I'm not a huge FTL fan. I've never been a long-time listener of the show, but there was a period in the late aughts and the early teens where I did listen, and that is where I learned both about the Free State Project, of which I'm now a member, and I've lived here for over 7 years at this point, and also Porcfest. And FTL, Free Talk Live, and Ian Friedman were always a pretty lively part of the Porcfest scene. They never necessarily ran it. They weren't the only thing going on. That was not the case as far as any of the ones that I went to, and I'm not sure that it ever was. But Ian was actively promoting both Porcfest and the Free State Project. They were having their goal of getting 20,000 signers to agree to move, and as soon as that was reached, then they dumped him. Now, they dumped him because he's a little bit of a hot potato. He'd infamously, however you want to say it, opened up and spoken about a relationship he had with a minor. She's not a minor anymore. I've met her a few times, although she's in her 20s now, I think. And no acrimony from her point of view, and I don't think he ever faced any kind of legal problems because of it. But there was a lot of ostracism. What's interesting, though, is they knew about that for years and years, and it never seemed to be a problem. And then once they got 20,000 signers, then they were like, you're ostracized. And he was basically kicked out of Porcfest and not allowed to attend the event. Kicked out in the sense that Porcfest was organized and run by an official element of the Free State Project, and they just said, we're not allowing here. Now, they had ostracized people in the past. I remember some of the first ones that I went to, they would pass out flyers about this person or that person being ostracized for whatever reason. Didn't seem to be something they did very, very often. It was also done maybe a year before Ian to Chris Cantwell. So I remember, I think he had attended Porcfest before I went, or maybe the first year. I don't remember ever meeting him or talking to him. But he had been ostracized, and then a year or two later, Ian was. Now, Ian's subsequently did not attend for views. A lot of people got upset by that, thought that was hypocritical on their part, and a little, somebody who had done so much work for them, and they didn't mind any of his history or any of his views on, the age of consent, let's just say that, until they got 20,000 signers, and then they were like kicking him out. So a lot of people were upset by that, and it did kind of take the heart out of it a little bit. So 2015 or perhaps 2016 seemed to be like kind of the high water mark for Porcfest. And not that it sucked after that. That's certainly not the case. It was still fun and enjoyable and a worthwhile event. And, you notice that there's a lot of people who do come every year. They make a point coming from all over the country to attend this event. I wasn't able to go every year, but very close. But then what started to happen is we had COVID. And because of COVID last year, the regulations were basically all nixed. They were worried about lawsuits. They were worried about liability. So they just said, look, people can come, people can not come. I think that it was free. You couldn't actually register, and there were no there were events, but there weren't events. It was just like kind of a step back. Talking to the people who were there, who had been to earlier ones, they said they kind of felt like 2008, not 2020. And it really seemed like a breath of fresh air. I made a video way back in 2016, I think, called Porcfest Jump the Shark, ? Just saying, well, it's changed in a lot of ways that people don't like. The beauty of the event is that it's not regulated, that people are allowed to be free, and all of the chaos and sometimes acrimony that comes with it. And it does come with some acrimony. That's not always a bad thing. It's not that it's all kumbaya and everyone agrees all the time. It's that we can hash out our differences in a more mature way than just by political fiat, which is what people tend to think is the most wise way to possibly ever organize the world. So that was last year. This year, it seems like a nice hybrid, right? The event was official. There was no lockdowns. There haven't been lockdowns in New Hampshire for over a year. And let's see. And let's just make sure this is on. Looks like it's on. So, oh shit. So, all the people came back. All the speakers came back. There are a lot of speakers who didn't come. I remember Tom Woods came kind of to make a point last year of thwarting the lockdown, and this year he was able to come without that kind of chip on his shoulder as far as lockdowns were concerned. So that was great. And in true Porcfest spirit, I think the first night I was there, I was talking with some friends, and a little girl came up with a red wagon, and she offered to sell us moonshine. And I asked her how old she was, and in her clearly prepubescent voice informed us that she was 27. And then when I asked how old she really was, she said she was 11. And then when I asked why she was selling moonshine, she said, because I get 20% of the profits. And then she proceeded to sell moonshine for cash to one of my friends. Not me, obviously. I don't drink, so I wouldn't be drinking moonshine either. But there was a lot of that. It's one of the great things about Porcfest is the child capitalism and the child labor and the entrepreneurship. And there's a lot of that among children. So a wonderful aspect of the event. So that was great. Now, if it wouldn't also be Porcfest, so again, Ian Freeman has gotten into other problems related to Bitcoin, and he's not under arrest right now, but he's under strict restrictions at home, so he was not able to come to Porcfest. And several of my friends, who I won't name, did not go to Porcfest because they were getting questioned by the FBI, and they decided that it would be better to leave the country, so they did. I missed them very much, but I totally understand their position. But it would not be Porcfest if there was not some persecution of the feds going on, and there certainly was this year, as I think that there is always some. So a great time to get to talk to these people, to get to talk to these celebritarians that you maybe have known for a long time, to meet people that maybe you've known online for years and years and years, but never met, never had a chance to talk by a fire with. I will say it's such an involved event. I literally cut my sleep in half. So normally I'm adamant about getting 8 hours of sleep a night, and at Porcfest it really got cut down to 4, which is not good advice, but it was just necessary. There was so much going on, morning, noon, and night. People were usually up around the fire until 3, 4 in the morning, even later. Not to mention all the other little loci of things going on. So, great event, great spot. But to kind of segue this into the shower discussion, Stephen, thank you for the comment, and I will talk about that. Probably will get his own video at some point because it was definitely interesting. I graduated from liking communal showers to running a co-ed communal shower for about half a week. So we'll get into that, I guess, right now. So Porcfest is hosted at a place called Rogers Campground. And Rogers Campground is in a very beautiful setting. It's in just outside, I think it's technically in the city limits, but it's just outside the urban center. Urban center is maybe the wrong term, of Lancaster, New Hampshire. And to give you some idea, Lancaster is on the Connecticut River on the border with Vermont. I believe it's the first city really on the river. I think the population is maybe 2,000. The city is small enough, and I keep saying city, and perhaps that's the wrong term because there isn't a single stoplight in the entire municipal unit. Let's say that. If you go outside of town, there is Rogers Campground, and it is located on the slope of a steeply sloping, I would call it a hill, maybe some people would call it a mountain, and of course, most of the slope of this hill has been deforested and then lotted out into various campsites, some for RVs, some for tents, some with houses on them, and it's incredibly scenic. The panoramas that are offered are tremendous. You can see basically the entire presidential range, which are the highest peaks in New England and in the northern Appalachians. The highest peak in all the Appalachians is actually Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. But given the topographical relief, these are much more rugged peaks because their bases are closer to sea level. There's many more of them, and because of the altitude and because of the latitude, they're much more alpine. So the summit of Mount Mitchell in North Carolina is not in an alpine zone. It's not in a subarctic zone, whereas the presidentials are. They're very lofty mountains. I've hiked Mount Washington twice. It's stunning. And not only can you see the presidentials, but if you look to the south, you can see the very top of Mount Lincoln in Lafayette Circle. And if you look to the north, you can see Mount Cabot and Whiteface and a couple other mountains farther up in the northernmost part of New Hampshire, which is quite rugged and rural. And, as small as Lancaster is, it's like the biggest city in the area, basically. And it's absolutely stunning. The weather was great. There's lots of moose. There's lots of bear, deer, sadly, a lot of ticks. But it's a gorgeous location. But the problem is that the campground is very old. And the campground is, basically dilapidated to a large extent. The owner is about 84, 85. And, he's been a great ally of the Free State Project and of Porcfest. But the way it's been told to me, he's been trying to sell the campground for many years for about $1 or $1.5 million, and yet it needs $2 or $3 million of repairs just to fix all the things that are really not up to snuff. The drainage, the water, the electricity, the facilities, everything about Rogers is in decline. All right, this is like the Lord of the Rings campground. It's just losing an ongoing battle with entropy. And of course, just like if you have a car that requires more repairs than the blue book value of the car, when you have a campground that you want to sell for $1 or $1.5 million and apparently are not even getting that, what are you going to do when you need to put in $1 or $2 million? So to give you some examples here, there is a large water slide built into the side of the hill. This is, not like an elevated, but they've cut into the hill and made this curvy, long, S-shaped water slide, maybe a few hundred feet. I'm not exactly sure. And the base of that water slide ends in a pool. In the 10 years that I've been going to Porcfest, I've only seen that water slide on once because they do not have enough sufficient water to actually fill it and operate it. So if you go to it now, when I went there last year, the base of that is just a scummy pool. Like there's no water. The water is like half full of water with frogs and lily pads. So obviously they're not really using it. They have a putt-putt golf course that's completely dilapidated. The campground has 6 wells that fill up. They don't have a water tower, but they have several water tanks at the top of the hill. So that acts as a water tower. You have these tanks. I believe there's 2 that are 5,000 gallons each. So they have about 10,000 gallons of capacity at the top of the hill. These 6 wells, can't fill the water tanks over the course of the evening. Typically what would happen is during the night, the tanks would be filled because people weren't using water. And then throughout the day, the tanks would slowly draw down as people use the water. And then at night, the 6 wells would catch it back up. They can no longer really do that. I don't know if it operates okay when the campground is under normal usage, but when Porcfest has happened, there's an extra few thousand people there. It absolutely can't. And here's the other thing. Although typically now I will always stay at a hotel. I've been staying at a hotel for years just because it's more comfortable. I've done plenty of camping, but I don't like doing that at Porcfest. The first 4 years, though, I did stay at the campground, sometimes in a car, sometimes in a tent. I don't think I've ever taken a hot shower there. When you go in, they have 3 different bathrooms. Each one is divided between men and women and usually has about 3 or 4 shower stalls in each. And there's never hot water. About 25% of the time, there's no water at all. There's always a line, and the bathrooms are always dirty. They're not air conditioned, they're not climate controlled, but the doors are always open. And because of the water pressure, all the fixtures, whether they be toilets or sinks or shower heads, are always covered in a thick dew of condensation. You can imagine how great that is for bacterial and fungal growth. And because the doors are open, all manner of arthropod life make their way into the feast of water and humans. So like always dirty, always cramped, filled with bugs, filled with mildew, filled with mold. It's just not very appealing. And of course you're waiting in line for a cold shower if you're lucky, and if you're not lucky, no water at all. So not a fun experience. Never mind the fact that there are stalls, which of course I would think is a suboptimal way to shower anyway. So I, in large part for that reason, in large part because of the dilapidated state of the showers, started staying in local hotels to the extent possible. You have to book them well in advance. They tend to fill up early. Usually around January is a smart time to do it if you want to do the Cabot even earlier. But that has been my tack. Now, I have thought for the last few years, because so many people come and do set up their own facilities. One year there was a sauna there. Obviously, people set up all kinds of kitchens, things like that, dance clubs, tattoo parlors, massage parlors, things like that. You know, the idea of, well, maybe if I don't like the fact that there are no showers, maybe I should make showers. And I mentioned this a couple times, and a few people encouraged me and said that I should. But honestly, as soon as I thought about the logistics, I thought it's just way too much work and way too expensive, and I just don't see that that's something that I want to enjoy Porcfest. I don't want to be, trying to make some crazy logistical thing work. Enter one of my subscribers. So I guess I didn't ask him if I was going to talk about it, so I won't name him here, but he is straight, longtime subscriber. I've met him before, and he said that he saw on one of the Porcfest forums that there was going to be a so-called Body Freedom Village, which is run by a nudist who, of course, I know because I'm gay and I know all the nudists, but like this Body Freedom Village wanted to have a hot tub, but knowing about the limitations on the water supply and the fact that they weren't going to be able to filter that water very much or change it over maybe at all, wanted to have showers set up, because the only way to keep a hot tub in that situation even remotely clean would be to make sure everybody showered before using it. However, the organizer did not want to go to the trouble of building showers because it's quite a task under these circumstances. So my subscriber reached out to me and said, I think that this is a good idea. I've never taken a communal shower. I've seen your video on it. I was persuaded that seems like something I want to try. It's a worthwhile thing to do. And it just so happens that there's somebody else who needs showers and wants them, and maybe we can cooperate. So I think back in like January or February, we decided that is exactly what we will do. And we started the process of planning how to build a shower. Now, You think about the various parts. You need a shower, you need a floor, you need walls. You probably also want to have a changing area. You're going to have to do some marketing with some signage. You want to talk about whether you're going to charge, whether you're not going to charge. But the foundational thing that you absolutely have to have more than anything else, without which you can't do, is have water. And that proved to be the first, the longest, and the hardest problem for us, was to get water to this location. Now, having water brought to a location is a function that is, there's a market for that. People do that all the time. For construction sites, for festivals just like this, for people who are doing repairs to their house, for businesses that have problems. When I worked in the oil industry, that's where all of our water came from. We never ever were hooked up to municipal water supplies, and we certainly didn't drill our own wells. We would always have usually 1,000-gallon plastic tanks that would have potable water delivered, once a day or however often was necessary to keep them full. And then these would supply all the showers, all the sinks, whatever. And then the potable water may or may not have been drinkable. Is one thing at oil rigs that you should know. Don't ever drink the tap water. It might be safe, it might not. Typically they would just provide also, bottles or jugs of water, so those are that's what you drink and brush your teeth with, but then everything else you can shower with and whatnot. So this proved to be very, very difficult. Everybody that I called refused to deliver that far. We found places advertising themselves as New Hampshire's source of water, and when you told them where you needed it, absolutely not. I called a place in Vermont who said he could get me 4,000 gallons for $800, plus 1,000 gallons of storage that he would rent us for about $450. Sounded like a pretty good deal. And then when I told him it was in New Hampshire, he said he could not cross the border because that is, quote, interstate commerce, and that his licensure does not cover interstate. It only covers intrastate. And so he was not able to cross the border. That it was a whole other thing. So that was ironic. Federal government, thank you very much for making this much more difficult than it needed to be, because God forbid somebody from Vermont deliver water to New Hampshire. That would obviously be something very unacceptable. He was based in northwest Vermont, right by Lake Champlain, so it's not like they have a water shortage there. And it's also not like I wasn't offering to pay good money for their time and services. So months and months of trying, calling, getting nothings, getting no's, getting non-replies, getting maybes that didn't go anywhere. The only thing we found out, the showers themselves were actually the easiest thing. I found a great company in Australia that designs showers that are designed to use natural water supplies. These are basically for people who go camping or hiking. You wouldn't want to carry this on a pack, but if you were in a car or tenting someplace, you can take this in, hook it up to a propane heater, run the hose, it's got its own pump, put it into a body of water, and boom, you have a hot shower wherever you are. We bought a couple of them. Great piece of equipment. They're called Joolca, 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 and they make these showers are great. Really simple to use, really simple to set up, and really effective. But again, water. Could not find water until literally Porcfest started on Monday. We were planning to go out there on Sunday, and we figured it out, I think, on Thursday or Friday. We found a guy on Facebook Market who said he had tanks, 310-gallon and 275-gallon tanks. He could sell them to us, I think, for $70 to $90 each, and that he would fill them with, quote, river water. Now, questions about what river and filtration and whatnot, but these are just for showers. They're not for drinking. So sure enough, he delivered the tanks, about 2,100 gallons of capacity total, and then took them one by one to the Connecticut River, which is in this part of its flow. I would not take the Connecticut River water from Bridgeport or someplace in Connecticut, but in this area, in the northeast corner, a few miles from Quebec, from the start of the river, is probably as good as you're going to get. That doesn't mean I would drink it, but there's probably not going to be lots of runoff from factories, because I don't believe there are any factories that far north. Maybe some moose excrement, but that would be the extent of it. So we filled them up. We put in some bromine tablets to clean them up. A little bit, not enough to drink, but enough that they're not going to have any microbes in them. And then I went to Home Depot and bought all the stuff to build a floor, to build walls, and to figure out a pump and a way to split the water from the, pump it out of the tank to a hose, split it up, and send it to the 4 showers. So Took a couple days, but we got it ready by Wednesday. And to answer your questions, Stephen, yes, people use them and people seem to like them. The people who use them tended to be repeat customers. We let them go for free. It was co-ed. It was a single area. I'm going to remember this correctly. It was 8 feet by 4 feet, so a rectangular space. And we had started with 2 and then later 3 shower heads. We had a 4th shower that was spare that we ended up not using. And sure enough, after the first day that we were operational, the staff running the facilities approached us and said that they indeed had run out of water on the campground and that they would be turning off the water not only in the bathrooms but over the entire campground the next day at 11 a.m. And they asked for what we were expecting from people, if we were charging, whatnot. He encouraged us to charge money because he thought that there would be so much business that we would run out very quickly. Because we weren't sure it was going to work, we didn't know we were going to have water. We didn't know how the pumps were going to work. There were a lot of things that we put them together on the campsite without ever having tested any of it. So this was truly an alpha test. We did not do any marketing. We had no signage. We had no advertisement. We didn't hire any children to walk around with signs telling people to go. I would say you could say we dropped the ball, and that would probably be fair. But suffice to say, we did not have a lot of advertising. But because we're the only show in town and because we were offering them for free, people did use them, and more people used them every single day. Most of the people who did use them tended to return and use them more. Sometimes they would bring friends. We had several couples that used them regularly. They were co-ed. I did keep track of the sex ratios. It was about 2 to 1 men to women. And then there were a couple trans people, actually. So this is going to come up. I know that there's just this controversy with this trans person in a spa in Korea. So I guess I could say I'm now an expert on this because I ran a communal co-ed shower with men, women, and trans people and children, although not very many. That was interesting. So I've never done co-ed showers myself. We just decided that was the only way to really do it. We didn't have the facilities to split it up into 2. Based on the numbers, it wouldn't have made sense to have it split up into 2. I think that it was going to be more of a benefit than a detriment. In terms of gay, straight, obviously, my entourage and the Body Freedom Village people are a lot of gay guys, and so gay men are definitely overrepresented, but plenty of straight guys were using them as well. Plenty of straight girls as well. And again, every day that we used them, more and more people did. It's kind of word of mouth spread. There were definitely people, so we were offering them for free, but we were mandating that you use them naked. They were covered on 3.5 sides. We had to elevate the floor at one point to better the drainage, and when we did that, you still had privacy of your entire lower body, but many people's heads were visible. So people walking down the street were able to see that there were people showering, but they wouldn't have been able to see like any nudity, just a head, basically. One of the sides was a little bit open, but only for people who were on the site. So you had a decent amount of privacy, although certainly not total. And they were open. So like if you were in there showering and somebody else wanted to go shower, then that was, if you wanted privacy, then that was too bad for you. If you didn't mind, then you wouldn't mind. Lots of women, older women, younger women, older men, younger men, gay men, straight men, and trans people all together. Couples. Several people did message me after and say they really enjoyed it. I think a lot of people, and I'd almost include, I can't include myself here because I did this in Boy Scouts, but for a lot of people it was their first time showering outside. For other people it was their first time showering communally. Other people it was their first time showering in a co-ed setting. So many of the people who used it, it was among their first experiences like that. Not all. I'm sure that the nudists among them have done far more and far more often, but it was novel for a large portion of the people who used them, and I think most of them were pretty happy, and most of them came back. Everyone involved enjoyed it, and we've already started making plans for what we're going to do next year, how we're going to go different. The transgender spa incident was in Los Angeles. Yes, it was. We had it's a funny story there. So I had a clipboard and I was not taking names or personal information, but I was checking how many guys, how many girls. And no more information that I wasn't asking ages. I wasn't asking sexual orientation. If I knew that they were gay, I did make a little side tally to just kind of keep that in my mind. And I did see what was, first, oh, it's a woman with boobs. And then, oh no, she's got a dick. Okay, so they're trans. So I added a third column for trans. And then the following day, I was in the shower myself. It was late in the evening. It was dark. And I was going to use the hot tub. And this couple came in, a handsome guy and a cute woman. And as we were showering, he's like, do you have a YouTube channel? I'm like, I do indeed. So yeah, I don't think he's a subscriber, but he had seen the channel at some point. He said that he'd been active on the anarcho-capitalist subreddit, which hasn't really been that anarcho-capitalist in a couple of years, so dated a little bit. But friendly people, got to talk to them, and then I showed them the clipboard, and I was like, oh yeah, we've got men, we've got women, and then we got trans people. And she looks at me, she goes, you need to add another one of those. So totally fooled me. I had no idea. Like, maybe she was talking about her husband, but there's no way they make dicks that look that real in surgery at this point. Or if they do, sign me up. Jesus. But, so two that I know of. I wasn't there the whole time, so I wasn't able to count every single person. We didn't really police it. It was just open. We had instructions how to operate them, and we just mandated that people go naked. That was a problem for some people. Some people walked away. There was one woman who came up with a towel with all of her stuff, and she goes, hey, are these the showers? And I'm like, yes, they are. And she goes, are they free? I'm like, yes, they are. And then she goes, is there anything I need to do? I was like, yeah, you need to use them naked. Now, obviously, I'm not telling a girl to use them naked because I want to see a naked girl. Oh my God, I do not want to see a naked girl. But, that's the rule. The whole point is to become more open with your body and to connect with people through that means, to have that leveling effect and to have that platonic connect. There was no hooking up, there was no cruising as far as I could see or heard, and I was there most of the time, so I don't think that there was any. I don't think we even had to specifically forbid it from happening. I think most people just kind of understood that. But this girl was like, I was like, you have to go naked. She goes, seriously? I'm like, yeah. It's a shower. You have to use it naked. Like, I mean, this seems like a radical departure from what people think is acceptable. But if you're going to use a pool and you're going to shower in your suit would just catch all the fecal matter, and then you just take it in the pool. So it requires nudity. If you want to get clean, if you want to get clean, you're not going to get very clean wearing your boxers or a swimsuit. So I said, look, it's my showers, my rules. If you don't like it, you can leave. We have freedom of association here at Porcfest. There's no anti-discrimination laws, so get the fuck out. I didn't say that, but that was the tone. A couple of people said, wait, seriously, I have to go naked? I'm like, yes, you do. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they did. And again, a lot of people, I don't think the nudity even mattered. I think it was like, I want to take a shower and you have the only shower. So if that's the rule, that's what I'm going to do. And it wasn't a problem. So bigger and bigger. And didn't really get the chance to really promote any ideology or anything like that. I mean, I've got a communal shower website that I have that, was not there. Hey, Bash the Fash. Good to see you. So it was an interesting experience. It definitely changed my Porcfest in a lot of ways. So I wasn't, there was socializing because people were going there and talking to people there, but we were a little bit off the beaten path. So we didn't get the amount of traffic that I think I would have liked, but we ended up being able to use almost all of our water before we finished. And I think it was a great alpha test. And so, yeah, in the future, there will definitely be more communal showers at Porcfest, and we will be a little bit better about articulating why that is. There was a debate. So Body Freedom Village was the nudist site where we were located, and I'm friends with Jeff, the guy who runs that. Not great friends, but I've known him for years. We operate in the same circles, and he's a very outspoken nudist, and I'm not a nudist. But I do want nudity in a communal shower experience, and he wanted showers, so it was a perfect cooperation, and I think we had a great collaboration together. He helped with the site and with the water. We provided the showers, and that made his hot tub effective. But I will say, I don't think that you should have to get on board with nudism completely to use a communal shower. Not that I think nudism is bad. I'm not against nudism. I tend to agree, even though it's not necessarily my thing. But in the context of a communal shower, like I don't like those are battles that I don't see any necessary to fight. Jeff Chang, the sauce knows what Porcfest is. I've met the sauce at Porcfest. The sauce and I have met at Porcfest. It was a long time ago, but I do remember, and I'm still waiting to sue him in objectivist court after he stole an idea from me or something. We're talking about 2012 here, though, so it was quite a while ago. Maybe the statute of limitations have passed on all that stuff at this point. But, so, yeah. So it was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to next year now that we know what we're doing. We weren't sure what we were doing. What about children? Where do you draw the line? That's a great question, Ichabod Crane. So, interestingly enough, so legally, there isn't a line. We're not talking about having sex with anybody. We're not talking about touching anybody. That's strictly not allowed. And the way it was policed and the way it was set up, it's not practical. And this is one of the things that I think is counterintuitive, but when you think about it for a little bit is absolutely true. Communal showers are much safer for that than our stalls. If you want to, take it from a gay man who was hooked up in a gym locker room before. Not mine. I never hook up at my gym. You don't shit in your own bed. But, when I travel, I've been known to hook up with people in gym locker rooms. And when I've done it, it's always been in a stall. Because you can go into a stall and you can close the curtain and you can turn on the water and then you can get it on. You can't do that in a communal shower. It's just not possible unless you're the only person there. And so having them be open is much, much safer for that sort of thing. The other thing is that it's currently legal to take a shower. Like if you go to a pool, at a YMCA or a campground or, a rec center somewhere, and you go into the showers and there are children there, like minor children, and they're naked and you see them. Nothing illegal has happened. Now, if you go and start to suck their dicks, then that's a huge crime. Now, if you go and suck their dicks and cut their foreskins off, then that's totally fine. You can do that. That's allowed. If you want to cut a foreskin off of a baby with your mouth and then suck the blood, that's totally cool. But if you go and touch it or kiss it, that would be a felony. But if you just see them naked, that is not a crime. And I would also say that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad to have a balanced perspective on the human body. And so, if you ever go, you can find this all over the United States if you go to the right pool. I've seen it all the time in rec centers. I've seen it at my gym. I've seen it at other gyms. I saw it growing up. When I was a kid, you don't think I never saw an adult man naked? I did, in addition to my own family, other people. Wasn't a regular occurrence, but it certainly happened, and I don't think it was traumatic. This is completely not only legal, but relatively normal. Now, you want it to have under certain... So there was one small child, and he used them with his dad. And I don't see what the possible problem is with a guy going there with his dad. My first gay friend was a kid who was raped by an adult. He killed himself. That sort of bias. Bias against what, Ichabod Crane, though? What does that story have to be seen? No one's saying you should rape a kid. No one's saying that should be tolerated. Nobody's saying that should be encouraged. So you're just kind of making this logical leap that if you allow people to use a communal shower and you allow kids to use them, that's going to happen. That's not necessarily what's going to happen. I'm against public schools. Public school sucks, but every public school in the country forced kids to shower naked for about 80 years. And I'm sure you can find cases of abuse happening, but they were few and far between. So, but he may be joking, but it's a perfectly legitimate question. And honestly, there's a large portion of libertarians who freak out anytime anything. Oh, and by the way, Drew, too bad you couldn't make it. I'm sorry that I missed you. I was looking forward to getting a chance to meet you, but there's always next year. there's a large portion of libertarians who freak out anytime anything that could vaguely be considered sexual involving children happens. Yeah, and at some point that level of taboo treatment of the topic is counterproductive. Like if you've seen my videos on it, I've talked a lot about the age of consent. Look, I believe that it should be based on your mental abilities, and that means that some people who are 18, 19, and 20 are not able to consent. And if you engage with sexual acts with them, then you've created a tort, a rights violation, and it's a serious problem. On the same token, it is entirely possible, and I would just open this up, that there are some people who are younger than 18, and of course some states recognize this anyway, who can consent. They do have the mental ability and the physical ability to consent to some things, kissing or having sex. When is different for everybody, and there's certainly good questions to be asked about how do you work that variability into a legal framework. And there's an argument to be made. Isn't it simpler and safer to err on the side of like, let's just set an age, because sure, maybe there's a 14 or a 15-year-old who could, but most of them can't, so let's just say the age is 17 or 18 and call it good. I think that it's not as difficult as people think, and so it is possible to have a variability there. If you think about roller coaster rides, what do? They have a thing and says if you're this high, you can ride the roller coaster, and if you're below that, you can't. Now, measuring your height is a little bit easier than measuring your cognitive ability, but not much if you're talking about something going to court or a legal paper or somebody wanting to file. And I'm not even just talking about sex here. I'm talking about a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old who wants to sign a contract, right? Who wants to get a job, who wants to start a job, who wants to be legally emancipated. Like, I think that those are the more important things, and then subsidiary to that is their ability to consent or not consent to sex. And I think that based on Teen 2.0, which is a great book that I wrote on this topic, it seems that once you start to go through puberty, that doesn't mean instantly the second you start that you're ready, but the fraction of the age cohort that is ready goes up and up every single year. And I do think that the ability, most people are able to consent to something like sex a little bit earlier than most people are comfortable with, but certainly not anybody who's prepubescent. That's never the case, right? So not for 8, not for 9, not for 10, not for 11, probably never for 12, but in rare cases, maybe 13, 14, and age of consent is 14 in like France and Italy and Spain and Brazil. So like, I think 14 is closer than 18, but age of consent was a big issue on Twitter this week because of Thad Russell. He'll be mobbed for people calling him a pedophile. Yeah, it's really interesting that people will be like, we want 16-year-olds to vote, but they can't can't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or have a job. And also interesting, where did I see this? I was almost going to make a video. It was so funny. They were saying that like a 16-year-old can't consent, therefore I think it was for work. Yeah. 16-year-old can't consent to work. And if you make a 16-year-old work, then it's, evil and you're like basically enslaving them. But you can force them to go to fucking school where they can't even make money and they're not even deciding to go there. They're being forced to go there by compelling. So like, it's this weird double standard. What's with libertarians constantly having to argue about children? Don't constantly have to argue about them, just sometimes. So, and we have to keep the FBI interested, big dumb fat cat, And I have read Basquiat. So yeah, it's interesting that people raise objections, like, oh, are you a radical libertarian? You would allow a teenager to take a shower in a communal shower. Yeah, teenagers take communal showers in the showers all over the country, and it's perfectly legal. It's not legal to then go and have sex with them, and that wasn't going on, and that wasn't allowed. So, yeah, I think that, and I don't see the terrible problem with that. The problem is if you're having sex with minors, but you're not having sex, you're just taking a shower with them. Go to Iceland, go to your local YMCA, go to any place that has these facilities, you're going to see it happening. It happens every day, probably a couple million times in the United States. Have you ever considered starting a Twitch channel or growing your YouTube? How do you fucking grow my YouTube channel? It's been on for 10 years and it's, you know, it's stuck in the 3,500 range. Noob. I don't know who you are, Ichabod Crane. So you know, you ask a question, I'm going to answer it. I'm not going to assume that you already know my answer, right? But there is a trend. Are you a nominalist? I don't know what that is, so I can't say. Or do you have a moral frame? Is materialist concerns the highest order? I do have a moral frame, right? And my moral frame is that for something needs to be consensual, and that means that people have the ability to consent, and not everybody does. And I just said that in my answer, which you said that, you know, you already understood and you're a noob because you already know that. Yeah, you need to be able to consent, and the ability to consent requires certain cognitive abilities, which young children do not have, some teenagers do not have, some adults do not have. However, in addition to that, most adults do have them, most teens do have them, and no prepubescent people have them. Right? The cognitive developments that happen with puberty are not to be found in people who are prepubescent. But once people start to go through puberty, you will have more and more of a given age cohort who can. And so based on the research that I've read, and people are going to hate, but I'm going to say it, like, I think the majority of people, not all, but the majority of people are probably going to be able to consent to sex when they're 14 or 15. Not everybody, and some people when they're 18 or 19 still can't, but that is the basis. If you can consent, and what is the morality of telling somebody who is physically capable of sex and cognitively capable of agreeing to set and consent, what is the morality of telling them you're a child and you have no rights? Because that's what we're really talking about. And you're telling them you can't be independent, you can't sign a contract, you can't agree not to go to school, you can't agree to get a job, you can't agree to work certain hours, you can't agree to date the person that you want to date, because apparently you don't have any moral framework, because you're just telling them because your age. But who cares about it? The age is only a proxy. That's the whole point. We're using age as a proxy for cognitive ability or physical development or some combination of the two. Well, why use a proxy when we can use the actual thing? Kids these days are treated like subhumans. They can't work. They are forced to attend school. They can't sign contracts. They think they should be treated more like adults at a younger age. Absolutely. And that's how you get people who are completely immature 20-year-olds. That's how you get people who go to college and they don't know how to get gas, change a tire, hold a job, take an argument, do anything. If you smother them this way, then they're never going to flourish. And it's really bad when you have people who maybe they do have bad parents. Maybe they do have an abusive family or a crappy family, or they hate school, or they hate, and yet they're legally constrained. They're in a straitjacket that if they try and struggle and get free, the police will come and take them and throw them into custody. Maybe it won't be prison, right? But it will be into foster care or an orphanage or institutionalized or whatever it is. And it's a tragedy, man. It's a tragedy. And like, you can always go and say, well, you're only saying this because you want to hook up with teenagers. Like, no, that's not the only reason I'm saying that. And it's part of the reason. Look, it's a little weird, but like the age of consent for sex is only like a single light spectrum of a whole range here, right? And we're telling people you can't work, you must go to school, even though school sucks and they don't learn anything. It's a waste of their time and our tax money. And they don't. Not only do they not learn anything, there's a major attempt to indoctrinate them to learn stupid, bad things. And it also is a huge opportunity cost. They could be using that time basically for anything else, right? So that's a pretty low bar to do better than that, but they can't because they're legally not adults. Or back to their abusive family. Or if they're emancipated, they don't have to live with their family. But yes, like, absolutely. You know, you have people who want to be free from their parents and they can't. They have to be a ward of the court. If a child isn't working in an Amazon wage cage, it's being treated as a subhuman. Well, at least in an Amazon wage cage, it would be getting paid. It's not getting paid to go to school, and it's not learning anything valuable in school. And also, that's not the only place to work. And, you know, to go back to the based Mises Caucus people, what was their tweet? When we talk about allowing children to work, we're not talking about 8-year-olds in coal mines. We're talking about 14-year-olds working at flower shops, right? And if you can't distinguish between a prepubescent working in a deadly heavy industry and a teenager working in a service industry, then you can't tell the difference between what's real and what's fake. Well, thank you, Ichabod. I appreciate it. No hard feelings. Good questions. Even if you were joking, those are totally valid and totally good questions. And I think that this is going to be a problem with the showers. People are asking it. Legally, it's completely in the clear. As long as you're not doing anything sexual, there's actually nothing anyone can say. But I know that this was an issue because the guy who was running it with me, the Body Freedom Village guy, he said he didn't want any minors there unless they were there with his parents. Now, I have absolutely no problem with people being there with their parents, and I think that that obviously would get rid of any kind of opprobrium, but I don't think that's necessary. I don't think a 15-year-old needs his dad to shower with him to be safe. There's a case to be going the other way. There was a porn star that had an extremely low IQ and didn't really understand what she was doing, got pressured into doing porn and getting face tattooed. Yeah, that's the point. Like, if it's based on cognitive abilities, then if they are, 19 or 20, but they don't have the ability to understand what they're doing or make a judgment call and consent, then they cannot do those things, right? So it is a two-way street. I'm not just saying, and no one is saying this, I don't think, that, well, it's carte blanche, everyone over a certain age is fine. It's that you have to have a certain cognitive abilities, and there are metrics that you can use to establish that if it becomes a question. People wonder about this, and I think it is a fair thing to talk about and to wonder about. What are you talking about? That like every year we give everybody a test, and if they pass the test, then we give them a card, that says they graduated to be an adult and they have rights. No, I think it's more along the lines of you let people do what they want, and if they're not capable, they won't be allowed. So let's say you walk up to a bank and you're like, I want to open up a business, I want to open up a line of credit, I want to have a credit card, and they look at you because let's say you're 14, and they say, we're not going to do that because we don't think that you're mature enough or whatever. What they will probably start to do, though, is like, well, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. So the bank might start saying, look, there's an agency, it's an insurance company, it's a whatever firm, blah, blah, blah. They adjudicate this sort of thing. If you can pass their test, if you can pass their interview process, and you might have to pay a fee to do that, then they will certify, hey, this person is responsible if they understand enough that you can have a checking account. And there's probably tiers to this, right? There's like if we were talking about in the realm of sex, you need to have a higher cognitive ability to agree to get married than you do to have sex, and you need a even lower degree of cognitive ability to agree to kiss, right? So like there's stages to this. So like you're probably going to be able to agree to work for a job, to sign a contract before you're able to become the CEO of a company or become the president of the United States or whatever else. And then the question would become if anyone really disputes it. So you could have a question where 14-year-old gets a bank account, he gets a job, and then his parents come and say, he's our child, he's not allowed to do this, he needs to come back and live at home. And they have a dispute, and it goes to arbitration, and he says, I'm able to consent, I am self-aware enough, blah, 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 and they get it adjudicated, and the court says, oh, actually, according to these test results, actually, no, you're not. You aren't capable of understanding this. And like I've talked to guys, so I'm on, gay dating apps, right? And every once in a while, you'll get minors on there. They're not supposed to be on there. You're supposed to be 18 to use Grindr, for instance, the most popular one. But there are definitely guys on there who are not 18, even though the age of consent is usually lower than that in most places. But for instance, I remember talking to a guy who was below the age of consent, and he said that he wanted to hook up, and I was like, I don't want to hook up with you because I don't want to risk going to prison. And he said, well, I really want to hook up really badly, so what's the big deal? I'm like, okay, the fact that you don't understand the risks that I would be taking and that you think that, your horniness trumps the fact that I could be a sex offender proves, whatever your age happens to be, that you're not mature enough to do this. Right? That you're too immature to understand what's going on. And so even by my, loosey-goosey, hedonistic, gay libertarian standards, he can't consent, and he should not be somebody who meets anybody by even my standards, right? So why aren't socialists against coercive public schools where you have no choice but are against choosing where you work? That's a very good question, Jared. I have no idea why they would want to force you to be indoctrinated into their politics. I undetected hemophilia. How do you know you have it then? I don't know. But that is because of the Beatles saw her standing there. Ichabod, I think you've had too much to drink. I don't understand your question. Sorry. Have you listened to Bob Murphy on this issue or read Block's paper? On child liberation? No, I haven't. If you could refer me to those more, I'd be interested to see what they have to say. Are there any YouTubers that I recommend? All the good ones are gone. The golden age of like YouTube is over. This is the sauce is gone. He doesn't make videos, so there's just no other point, you know. I guess I'd say I like Drew. Drew Hancock has a good channel, but there's very few. I mean, YouTube has completely changed, you know, not completely. It's changed a lot. I mean, there's still parts of it that are the same. Some of us, you know, didn't change with it, but it used to be really interesting. You could go and debate any topic, and people would write these video replies, right? So someone would make a video about something, and you'd reply back, and you could have an honest discussion, and people could talk about this stuff. But that stuff, you know, it hasn't been all clamped down on not, but it's been incentivized against. And the other thing too is like they're really pushing certain channels that are really popular, and then people find like, well, you know, so and so has 100,000 or 1 million, you know, views. There's certain content that's getting not all, but a huge amount of the traction. And if you want one of these smaller channels like mine, you know, it's definitely a small channel. It doesn't traffic in that kind of stuff, and you know, I've debated, but like it's never seemed worth it to me. I'd rather talk about the ideas, you know, but maybe I'm hamstringing myself in old-fashioned. I don't know. Now every ANCAP has a bad podcast and supports the Mises Caucus. Well, there's plenty of people, Drew, who don't support the Mises Caucus. There's plenty of people who don't like it, and especially in the Beltway. And, you know, many Beltway libertarians. And here's another little bit of inside baseball. I do actually know Joe Bishop Henchman a little bit, not really well, but we're gay libertarians, so like it's a small world when it comes to that. And I did not talk to him about what happened, but I did talk to his husband, and the things that his husband said were so ridiculous. He thought that he apparently believes that the Mises Caucus want to kill all the black people. That the Mises Caucus exists to kill black people, and that Joe was fighting a heroic battle against the lynching of every black person in America by the Mises Caucus. It's fascinating that you can be that delusional and be, you know, an intelligent person, more or less. But people are, nonetheless. Oh, I got a $10 donation. Awesome. Thank you very much. I follow you for years. First time catching you live. Thank you for so much content. This really changed your life. Well, thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate that. I'm glad that you found value in it. So hats off to you. And thanks. I'm glad that you finally got to catch a live one. There are not that many. So awesome. So, you know, those people like the Joe Bishop Henchmans of the world, and I don't have any like antipathy towards him really. I guess I'm more radical and I have a different approach, but you should understand that many libertarians are Beltway libertarians, and I have many friends, and they're not all bad people. Some of those Beltway libertarians are just as plumb-line ANCAPs as everybody else, but some of them are not. And the whole Ron Paul, the Mises Institute, you know, hating the state and them evil, like they don't feel that inside them. They have a different zeitgeist, and many of them have become in the last couple years, for a year or two before Trump at the very least, really woke. And I was amazed the first time I went to DC when Trump was on the scene, and just shocked by how these people who never gave a damn about, I mean, I want to say that they you know, Obama or Bush could launch a war and kill 10,000 people, and, you know, they would politely disagree, and then Trump would tweet something mean, and they would just be absolutely apoplectic about it. And I'm like, where are the priorities there? But that is something that's true with a lot of people. What does a Beltway libertarian mean? John Wayne, a Beltway libertarian is a libertarian who lives within the beltway that surrounds Washington, D.C. There are a whole bunch of libertarian think tanks, especially Reason and Cato, and a few others. And there's also many policy people there who aren't officially associated with one of those think tanks, maybe some of the others, American Enterprise Institute, a few others. And they live in the Beltway. And also, even if they don't live there, they maybe have that ideology. And they're very much urban, progressive elites who just happen to be maybe more small government. And it's endemic. And if you look at the Mises Institute, the reason they're in Auburn, Alabama, and not in New York City or in D.C. is because they wanted to be away from that influence, and they were very successful in doing that. And their brand of libertarianism is much purer and much less alloyed with other impurities than this. Look, there's a lot of great things. There's a lot of good Beltway libertarians who I like. I'm friends with a lot of them. But I think sometimes they are culturally so cozy. They're so, like, people who live in DC very often, not all, again, I'll be methodological individualist here, but they like it there. You know, they think of it as a beautiful city. They look at all the cut stone, right? You know, most cities, if you have a bridge, it's made out of concrete and cement and rebar and steel. If you go to DC, it's made out of limestone, right? And there's beautiful museums everywhere that are free because they're not really free, but the taxpayers in Iowa and California and Wyoming and Maine pay for them. And the standard of living is very high, and people don't have to work very much because there's free money on tap. Because it's the source of so much, it's the fountain of tax money, it's a fountain of power, and there's also every union, every think tank other than the Mises Institute, it seems, every association of business, whether it's the AARP or the FFA or whatever, they're going to have their headquarters there. And they have this nice cocktail sipping urbanite life, going to parties and being sophisticated and thinking that they're better than everybody else. And again, they don't all think that, but it's very, very, very common. And a lot of people who fetishize themselves, there's a lot of people who view themselves as better than their peers, who think they're smarter and more sophisticated than the people around them. And many of those people are drawn to DC, and they think that it's better than that. I've met so many faggots who fetishize DC and want to live there. And I remember one guy, nobody's born there. They're the best at what they do, and they move. They're bull fucking shit. And they're so fucking elitist and so status oriented. And it's like, who has access to the president? Who has access to a senator? Who has access to a congressman? Who's on the Supreme Court? Blah, 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 blah. And completely in a bubble, a tax-funded fucking mega bubble. And again, they're not all bad people, and a lot of them say stuff that I agree with, and I'm good friends with a lot of them. But many, many of them are just completely detached from reality. Whether we're talking about foreign policy or Trump or any number of a dozen, wokeism, like many of them are completely detached from reality. No, it's not to say rural people can't be detached from reality too. I don't want to make it sound like we, the people of the earth, are the salt of the earth and have all that. No, that's not necessarily true. But there's a certain venality, and the thing is, their bigotry manifests as policy that fucking ruins people's lives. Sometimes at the end of a missile, sometimes the end of a regulation that terminates a business or a tax that causes one less person to be hired or to lose their job or whatever, and they revel in it, and they think that they're managing society, and it's fucking gross, but it's super common. Anyway, long story short. Oh my god, how many questions? Fuck, guys, I'm way behind. My feed has turned into people reacting to viral videos. That's the thing. There's just so much bullshit on YouTube now. And there's good stuff too, but you have to sift through so much. I like Tim Pool. I like Tim Pool too. I don't agree with him on everything, but he seems. I forgot. Luke Rudowski was at Porcfest, and I don't think he even spoke. He just goes to Porcfest to hang out there. I'm sub to some leftists simply because they speak their minds. There's a couple good leftists who are good for that. Jimmy Dore probably comes most to mind. Glenn Greenwald, Max Blumenthal. Like there are some, they're totally wrong about a lot of stuff, but you can almost see that it's refreshing that like they have an opinion that's not changed by what's popular in the moment. So they didn't become woke necessarily, or anti-Trump, or Russiagators, or they're not into BLM. Now they might be into communism, so fuck them for that. But like at least they're have a point of view and they'll argue it. So like and some of them have done great work, especially Glenn Greenwald. But Chris Camel was a joke for years. The fact that he pointed him. Yeah, I never was impressed by him. He's really ugly. Like, not that this matters and it doesn't matter. He's really ugly. As I waft the beautiful locks of my hair. And I think that like it psychologically fucked him up. You got me started reading books instead of just listening to Molyneux, so I agree with the guy who donated. Well, thank you, Drew. There's something, it's interesting because there's so much that you can learn from listening to synopses and listening to lectures, and like people can distill arguments down, but sometimes that distillation makes things move away. You lose something. So you could go and one of the places I learned the most from was the Mises Institute videos, and they would just have all these lectures, and I don't really watch them anymore, but like in the 2006 to 2010, I was watching all that shit. But it was better to go and read Man, Economy, and State. It was better to read Power and Market. There's something about the method where you can write out a book and can really line up all your arguments in a detailed, articulate way. You can take your time and really flesh out an idea that is just very difficult in a video or not. Now, of course, if you make an audio that's just you reading the text, then you can do it then. But that's not what most of the content is. And that's like you're just reading the book kind of in that point. So like there's a wealth of stuff that's in books that's not in video, and there's a way to be systematic and thorough in an argument or in an idea or in a concept that is just very hard to get in bits and pieces from clips on the internet, even if there's a huge volume and a lot of them are good, which they are. So I'm very happy to direct people to read books. Very, very happy to direct people to read books. I can give a synopsis. I can recommend. Maybe I can encapsulate some of the arguments, but it's better just to read it. Now, we have limited time, so like that's the problem. That's the downside, So you just prioritize and see where to go. What are you interested in, And that's another thing is like, for me, I wanted to learn about things that I just wasn't finding, Initially, it was history stuff. Like you could say, I'm really into history, so I'm just going to watch the History Channel. Well, most of that stuff is about aliens and Hitler. But even when they do history stuff, you're limited to what they decide they want to cover, and that's usually not very much. Oh, is this the same Matthew who already donated $10 and you donated $5 more? Jesus Christ, I'm going to quit my job. I'll answer your question in a second, Matthew. Thank you very much if you're not that Matthew. It's... Well, you just made me lose my train of thought. Thank you very much. Sorry. So he asked, this may be too broad a question. What do you think the direction... What is the direction you want to see libertarianism go? Do you see the growth as possibility or even a priority? So it's interesting because what is libertarianism? Right, it's an idea. So where do I want to see it to go? In terms of ideology, I think that it needs to come to grips with the fact that there is more to life than economics. I think libertarianism has just nailed economics in a way that none of the other political ideologies have even come close to. Like, they've really taken some lessons, and I don't just mean from the Mises Institute or for Austrian economics. They've taken even like the basic lessons of macro, even stuff from the Chicago or just mainstream macroeconomics, and really, really incorporated them into their into the ideology in a way that, but there's more to that, and I think that we need to learn how to navigate that kind of marginal area of like, what do you say about stuff, like how do you act about something that it's not consent, like how do you deal with manners, right? How do you deal with What is a good way to interact? You could say, well, it's not, you're not violating the NAP, so is there any more that we can say? And that's a question we should ask ourselves, right? What more do we say beyond the NAP? What more do we say? On top of that, I would say, and this is a pet issue of mine, there's one big pet issue, so it's not the communal showers, it's the circumcision issue. I do think that libertarianism should get more involved in the circumcision issue. I think it's an obvious rights violation, and it's a massive rights violation. And it's also a very interesting topic because we're talking about the rights of the parents vis-a-vis the children, and you're talking about religious rights, tort reform, crime, blah, blah, blah. There's like a lot. It's a very interesting thing, and it's something that libertarians have, for the most part, with the glorious and notable exception of Stefan Molyneux, basically ignored. And it was, interestingly enough, libertarianism has been great at cutting through what the status quo and seeing things that people take for granted and being like, hey, there's a problem here. Taxes aren't okay. Regulations aren't okay. Public schools aren't okay. Right? Things that people just assume are normative and don't even question. But circumcision is something that basically slipped through the cracks there, I think. The only other one, and it's gotten more play and more talk and it's debated more, would be abortion. It's not that has been debated a lot more, and there's pros and cons in libertarian movement on that. So it's in a more developed theoretical state than circumcision is in the libertarian movement. But those are the two issues where I wanted to see more. In terms of that, in terms of the ideology, I think we need to talk about what other questions can we ask, and are there other norms that we can. What can we go beyond NAP? And the other thing too is to really drill down on what exactly consent is and is not, and when is that something that you can, right? It does become a gray issue. And to go into one of my other topics with all the stuff I've done with hypnosis, and I'll definitely have to do another video on hypnosis, but like that gets into very, very tricky territory when it comes to consent. Very, very tricky territory when it comes to consent. And there's just like no theoretical work on it. Because of a video I made on that a year ago, people have reached out to me who have said, I've never seen anybody debate, like even talk about the ethics of this. So that's something that libertarians should probably talk about as well. Wow, there's so many comments now. I'm getting way behind. And so when you start a stream, like nobody watches. And then I think I talked for 10 minutes before the first comment, and now there's so many that I can't possibly keep up. But thank you all for watching, and thank you, Matthew, for the donation. I do appreciate it, and I'm glad that I was able to give you something you value. And if you aren't able to watch the stream, just read some of the books that I recommend, and I'll be happy with that. You don't have to buy them from me; you can buy them on your own. Are you out of the oil industry now? For now. I got an offer to go back this spring, and I declined. It was a fair offer. It was a good offer. They wanted me to go work in North Dakota, which is the only state in the lower 48 states I've never been in. I've been very close to it, but never been. But I really do like New Hampshire. I really like my life here, and I did not want to leave for however many months. If they had offered me more, if they'd offered me as much as I made before the last crash, I probably would have said yes. But I got 2 offers from 2 different companies. So I still have connections there, and I am somebody with a good reputation there, so I do get calls. But I don't actively seek it out, and as it happened, I said no. So what do you think about Dave Smith? I like Dave Smith. I think he's really smart. I think he's really funny. I think he's well-read. I think that he's become enamored with and inculcated himself with libertarian theory, and he's a good proponent of it, and I have nothing really bad to say about him. So there. I don't listen to all of his stuff, but if I'm driving a lot and I don't have anything else, I'll listen to Part of the Problem. Beltway libertarians seem to be people that want to be accepted and act like liberals, much more likely to criticize conservatives over liberals. Yeah, they definitely. So I think a big part of that, Jared, I think that's a good way to look at it. Is they're in their social circles in DC, they're all liberals. Like even the conservatives, like you can say Ted Cruz, blah, blah, blah. Very few of those Republicans are actually not liberals. They're just branding as Republicans because that's what they need to do in the red states where they're from. And even if they are genuinely conservative, which maybe some of them are, or genuinely religious, which maybe some of them are, all their staff, everyone, all their friends, all their parties and stuff are not. And you're going to be a pariah. And they will. Look, liberals fucking hate you when you disagree with them. They fucking hate you. But for the, like, I'll never forget when I first like decided that I was going to start being gay and like meeting guys. I went onto Reddit and I posted something along the lines of, I want to start meeting guys. I'm worried if my political ideology is going to get in the way. I'm a libertarian. Oh my God. There was like one or two people who said, well, that doesn't really matter what your political ideology is. You know, if you're a good guy, it doesn't matter. Almost every comment was like, fuck you, fascist. You're a fucking fascist. You hate children and you hate minorities and you want like everyone to die and blah, blah, blah. And you're awful. And why are you such an, like, whoa. And, you know, none of them knew anything about libertarianism other than a boogeyman that they saw in a cartoon. And they never read a book, never read an author, never heard a debate, never could articulate a single thing. And when you try and debate them, none of them, they did not engage at all, or if they did, they couldn't defend any single point, like even the most basic stuff. And yet they felt perfectly comfortable casting, look, I have really strong political beliefs. I think that I'm right about them. I wouldn't hold them otherwise, but I don't think people who disagree with me are evil or horrible or stupid. Some people are those things, but just because they disagree with me does not make them those things. And I don't treat them as such. And that's maybe the necessary tolerance of a minority position. I don't know. But if you live in DC, you're not going to be popular at the parties. You have to go and say, oh, well, and like, we're against killing of black people, so we don't want the Mises caucus to take over the Libertarian Party. Something like half the richest counties in the U.S. are around DC. Well, it's all the top 3 richest counties are all around DC. I think 2 are in Maryland and 1 is in Virginia. Yeah, not half the counties. Half the counties is 2,000 counties, John Wayne. So, but yeah, yes, the richest counties in the country are all around DC, which is crazy when you think about you've got Westchester County and Nassau County in New York, and these other, Orange County. No, DC is the richest. Any thoughts on Jason Brennan? Nope, don't know who that is. Trump has good and bad. I really love. Yeah, he had good and bad. Mostly a failure, but there's some good things about him for sure. Oh my God, I'm so far behind, people. I'm sorry. Holy shit. Ugh. You guys are gonna have to start giving me money to read these. I was stationed near DC when I was in the military. I hated it. Made some good money driving for Lyft though. Oh, Christian, also, I found a video of some really cool waterfalls in Maine. So we should talk. I want to go to them. So if you ever want to go, there's some great like swimming holes in Maine that I want to go to, and they're up by you. So Christian Hodges, it's not Christian Hodges, sorry, is a Free Stater who lives in Berlin, and we hiked Mount Washington together a couple years ago. And he goes to Porcfest. Jimmy Dore. Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Dore is like a horrible communist in so many ways, but like at least he's open and he's intellectually honest, even if he's wrong, which is more than can be said for most liberals. Natural Rights of Children, Bob Murphy's Show, episode 180. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Miguel. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to find that online right now. Bob Murphy Show 188. Bob Murphy. I would be interested to see what they say about it. I respect both of them. Is it still wrong for adults? Okay, perfect. I won't listen to that right now. Hans Hermann Hoppe is great. Okay, I'm just scrolling through these really fast now, guys. Start Twitch streaming, lol. Those guys pulling huge money by talking to their chat, reacting to videos, playing video games. It's almost like choose your own Big Brother service for teenagers. I've heard, though, that you have to do like 100 hours of streaming before you can make money. David Friedman is great. David Friedman loves Porcfest, and I think he loves it because the sex ratio is about normal, and that's like the only libertarian event that's true. There's families that go, there's children that go, there's married couples that go, single. I don't know if there's any single women. They would get probably mocked. But there's lots of couples that go. There's lots of families and kids, and that distinguishes the Free State Project from basically every other libertarian thing, in that it has legs, it has a population, there's actually stuff going on. You can criticize it all day. There's lots of things you could say. There's lots of things that are frustrating about it, but it's got that, and nothing else does. Milton's son was asking great questions. I would disagree with you on this heavily, not on the circumcision issue, but the manners issue. Libertarianism is a political philosophy, not a life philosophy. Sure, but where exactly do you draw the line there? That's a good question, right? It's not always necessarily obvious. So you have a point, but like it's not as simple as that, I don't think. I recorded one of his lectures at Porcfest. I think David goes every year, and he's there all week. He definitely likes it. I've also heard him fart, so it's a good way to like come back to reality. I haven't been a fan of libertarian analysis of child-parent dynamics. I strongly disagree with the idea that parents own their child. I think they own the right to guardianship. So, Cold Train, I also do not think that people own their children. I don't know if I agree with your characterization of how libertarians have acted about it. Some of them have. Rothbard wrote about it a little bit, and I do think that when you create life, that life has rights that are independent. It's not your property. You have obligations, and I do think, and I've made videos. One of the first videos I ever made 10 years ago was child-parent obligations, and I think that parents have a lot of obligations to their children. The reason is that they have put an innocent person in a very awkward position. Nobody chooses to be born. Nobody chooses to be conceived, right? The parents either decide to conceive a child, or they decide to risk conceiving a child, one or the other, and either we responsibilities towards the care for that person, right? And I use the analogy: if I get in my car and I hit a pedestrian, and it's my fault, right? The pedestrian is not at any fault whatsoever. Let's say that could be established without any shred of doubt, that it's completely my fault. I am then obligated to, pay restitution, and that restitution is going to include other things like their medical bills, and if they need to have any procedures done, and if they need to have sit in a hospital for 6 months, and if they need therapy for 4 years or whatever. These are all things that legitimately could be asked for me to pay. And I cannot say in defense, I did not want to hit them. I was just going to go to the gym, and then it happened. Sorry. And of course, if I say I was trying to hit them, then that makes it even less defensible, right? Even if I say I wasn't, it was an accident. I was just having fun driving because I love to have fun driving, and I didn't think, right? I didn't want to have a kid. I was, I like to have sex, and it just happened. I put that pedestrian in a horrible position. It's on me. I'm obligated to take care of them until they're better. And, we can debate about exactly how much, am I supposed to pay for their birthday party 25 years later or whatever. But like, I owe them restitution for having put them in the position. And I would say that parents owe their children. Children do not owe their parents. I don't think the obligations of parents are unlimited. And I think this is a harder question when you talk about regular kids, right? So there was a case not too long ago where like a 35-year-old was living with his parents and he wouldn't leave, and they were trying to evict him, and there was this legal course. And I think that there's an argument there to be had, like, look, we had you, we raised you, we provided for you. It wasn't your fault that we conceived you, and it wasn't your fault that you were born, but we covered our ass and we did what's necessary, and you can go. But where that line is exactly, I don't know. I actually think one of the harder questions is when you have a child who can't take care of themselves, right? You have a child who's mentally retarded or physically retarded, and they will never be able to be independent. Does that mean those parents just lost the lottery and are now obligated forever to subsidize that child's life, that person's life forever? That's a very hard question. I will also say it's not a particular, it's kind of a rare thing, so it's not something that necessarily defines the entire argument. I think that's actually one of the more interesting hard questions. But no, parents do not own their children. Anyone who says that would then say that their parents can kill their children as their property, and even Rothbard would not say that, although I think he did say you could sell them into slavery, although don't quote me on that. So I don't agree with that. I also don't think that many libertarians have spoken on it, or I had this debate with not Christensen in the lake in Berlin actually years ago. Regarding abortion, what's wrong with conferring rights upon birth? Because developmentally speaking, it's a human before that. It's a life before that, and we have science to say what kind of life it is, and it's not a fungus. It's not a beaver. It's not a lizard. It's not a snake. It's a Homo sapien. It's a human life, and if you kill it, it is by definition homicide. Now, homicide is sometimes justified. Self-defense, maybe capital punishment. I don't agree with it, but there's an argument to be made there. But a fetus is not guilty of any crime, and it's not self-defense, so it's homicide. You can't do it. And you put that life in that position, you are therefore responsible for it. Right? Excited for the next book review. Any idea what it's going to be? If you haven't seen, watch The Power Broker by Robert Moses. That was an excellent book, and I just recommend everybody read the fuck out of that book, or listen to it on audio or whatever else. And I don't have anything right up like that's going to be good. I'm reading a book on cattle mutilations right now, so I don't know if I'll do a book review on that. I find that a lot of libertarians are very well read on economics and history, but not on general philosophy. I've read so many fellow ANCAPs freak out at me for raising objections to the NAP. I would say, well, that they are definitely better read than most people, but they're surprisingly less well read than I would have thought. I assumed everybody was like me, and I was wrong. When I moved to New Hampshire, yes, there's plenty of people. I mean, it's the only place you're going to go and have a conversation about that, but plenty of people have never read anything. So it's way more than the average population, but it's not as much as some people. And you're probably right. And, I'll be frank, I haven't read a ton of regular philosophy. I have a philosophy section up there that's not all libertarian stuff, because there isn't, frankly, that much. But I haven't read it all. Reddit is the worst. Yeah. And the first you don't know, I'm actually very active on Reddit. I have a subreddit, and it has nothing to do with libertarianism. I have a communal shower subreddit, and it's like twice as big as this channel. So go figure. Because I've had that for less than 2 years, and I've had this for 10, and that's just a bigger deal, I guess. I guess maybe that's a smaller buy. And if you think about the time, if you just look at the length of the videos that I've uploaded, never mind upload times and all that, editing, which let's be honest, I don't hardly ever edit, but it's hundreds and hundreds of hours, and the amount of time I put into this subreddit is an hour a month. Ridiculous. Boop, 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 boop. So Porcfest is no fun for a single straight man. Lots of single straight men go. It's lots of fun. Objectivism is a life philosophy. It claims to be. What are your views on trans-related issues? That it should not be national policy, and the idea that we're going to set policy about trans issues is ridiculous. I think that each and every private bathroom should decide who and who should not be allowed to go in there, and I think that you would very likely see a lot of difference there. I have taken communal showers with trans people on multiple occasions now, and I personally don't mind doing it in most situations, but I do not think that my personal values then can be externalized and generalized to everybody else. I can completely appreciate a woman not wanting to take a shower with a male to female trans person who has a dick and a beard. And I can totally understand and have no philosophical problem or objection to a facility saying, I'm sorry, but you cannot use the women's room or the men's room or whatever else. And of course, I believe in the freedom of association. I take it very seriously. I don't care if they do stuff that I think is wrong and that makes them a dick and makes them... I don't care if they're racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. Their property, they can say it. That said, I don't think that's going to happen, but you're still going to have some disagreement there. And the idea that we're going to impose a policy on everybody is just completely asinine. I also think that they're being used like a little bit of a political football. So like all the trans people that I've met... like interacted with, every one of them used a communal shower. None of them used a stall, and none of them said they wanted to use a stall. And yet, in debates about communal showers, do you know what one of the number one things I hear is? You have to have stalls for trans people. Do trans people even say that? No, you're just saying that. You're using them as your... And I'm sure there's some who do, but like I've never heard them. Like, and I'm gradually becoming an expert on trans people in communal showers because like I've done it with at least 3, boom, that I know about. You know, so I didn't know the one, so like, you know, they can fool you sometimes. Yeah, the idea that there's a national policy on that is just ridiculous. I would have loved to have gone to Porcfest this year, but I was trapped in Australia. I agree with Rothbard on a free market in children. So... to go into what I was saying, that parents have an obligation to children, I do think it is fair to say that those could be fungible and transferable. So you have an obligation to your children. If somebody else comes and says, I want your child, I will take on that obligation, they should be able to transfer that. I think that that is, just like I think you should be able to transfer your tort, right? Let's say that you are a little poor person and you get harmed by a big rich company. They fuck you up somehow. They give you poison food or they damage you. And you know that you have a good case against them, but you also are worried that you don't have the legal means to fight it, and you're worried about fighting a big giant. So what you can do then is take your case and go to another big company and be like, here, you know, I have a tort against McDonald's, so you go to Burger King, and Burger King is like, okay, we'll take up your case, we'll pay you this much to buy your case, and then they can sue on your behalf, and then when they win, they'll get the money, and you'll take a cut by doing that, but then you also won't have to worry about whether you lose, whether you don't. You won't have to worry about fighting McDonald's with your lawyers because Burger King has their lawyers. And this is, for those of you who are interested and never heard of David Friedman's argument about this, this is exactly the kind of system that the Icelandic Free State had, and I have no doubt that that would still work, and I think that would also work with things like parents who don't want their children or other people who do want their children. When I look at Bob Murphy, he is endorsing Carolyn Borisenko. Don't know who that is. For years, I wanted to kill myself. Were my parents liable? We'd have to know more details than that, Ichabod. Benjamin Tucker said that parents own their children and could just throw them into a fire if they so pleased. Well, he was wrong about that. What is he, fucking Hindu? Maybe Rothbard was guilty of the trend in which libertarians strawman our own philosophy because they're in a rush to give an answer to a hard question. I don't know. Oh, sorry, guys. What is your birthday? That's none of your business. You as a gay man, I honestly don't understand your moral stance against abortion. What? It's homicide. I don't need to be gay to know that. That's just so ridiculous. I mean, like, I don't have a dog in the fight, and like, I'm not worried about getting the girl preggers, but that's not the basis of being anti-abortion. The basis of being anti-abortion is that it's homicide and human life. There's good reasons ethically in both utilitarian and moral reasons to value human life, and so it should not be extinguished flippantly. Now, I'm not saying it should never be extinguished. You know, self-defense, you know, a couple other possibilities, but like not that. Okay, not because you don't want to be fat for your prom picture or you made a mistake or whatever. It's a human life. You can't kill it without a good reason. Sorry. What does your YouTube channel name mean? I've said that before. I'm not going to say it again. You have to be just a super fan to know that. Rothbard didn't endorse child slavery. He endorsed a free market for children. This is similar to adoption. His argument is that you have a right to sell your guardianship claims, and bad parents would have an incentive to sell the guardianship claims over their children to better people. And so, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. And I believe, was it Richard Posner also believed that, and that's one of the reasons he'll never be on the Supreme Court. I think people grow into their rights, and it's not that crazy to say that as a fetus, you're not an independent existence, and rights shouldn't be given to them like they are. They're not independent by no fault of their own. They're dependent because their parents put them in that position, right? So let's say that I was to, again, use the example I did before, hit you with my car, and you are now, paralyzed, and you can't eat on your own, and you need an artificial lung. And then I go, well, you don't have any rights because you're not independent anymore. You don't have an independent existence. You only exist by all these artificial means. Therefore, you have no rights. The rights that you had when you walked out onto the road, those were one things. Now that your body's been crushed and incapacitated, you don't have those things anymore. Ergo, I don't owe you anything. You have no rights. There's no torts, nothing. No, that's of course not right. And why do I owe you? Why is it me specifically and not society in general? Because I'm the one who hit you. Likewise, if you're a parent, you're the one who created them, right? You shot your sperm into the egg, or let your egg get shot by a sperm, and you and in the case where it's not consensual, where there's rape, it's rare, but it happens. And then all of the responsibility falls onto the rapist, whether it's the man or the woman. Almost always the man, but not impossible for it to be the woman. And you are the one who is responsible for their incapacitated state, for their dependent state. It's your choices, your actions that made that happen. Therefore, you are responsible. Posner wrote a law article on child markets. I don't remember where I read that, Jared. It might have been in a David Friedman thing, but they basically were saying because he wrote that, it was dead in the water that he would ever be on the Supreme Court, because they would just bring that up. But it goes against people's intuitions, but it makes a lot of sense. How's the restoration going? Stephen, the restoration, thanks for asking, is going great, actually. I hooked up with an uncut guy a couple days ago, and he absolutely thought that I was uncut when he said something like, us uncut guys need to stick together or something like that. And when I said that I wasn't, he did not believe me. And I said I regrew it, and he's like, that's impossible. And I literally had to get out my devices and put them on. And he was like, holy shit, he had no idea. So I'm not done. There's still work to go. It's still an ongoing process, but it is far enough along now that, stuff like that happens. So that's good. How is Jeremy Kaufman? I don't know him. Okay, so he's the Mises Caucus guy who did the Twitter. And I looked him up because I'm like, I probably know who he is from Porcfest and everything. And I've seen him around, but I don't know him. I've never talked to him. Richard Epstein mentioned it. I think I wasn't there that I saw it, though, Jared. I'm pretty sure. I think it was David Friedman. Maybe it was Richard. I'm not sure. But, those are the kind of hard questions that people don't want to talk about. But, the alternative is much worse. If a woman lied about being on birth control, would you class that as a rape? And in either case, does that remove the responsibility from the male? I think that it could mitigate responsibility, but remove it altogether, I don't think that's the case. This is like if you drive a car and you take precautions, does that mean you're no longer liable? No. It doesn't. You still have liability, and I think you still have liability because birth control isn't perfect. You also have to realize that there's human error or human the woman could lie, right? So you might have an argument, if you got into a custody dispute and say, look, she said she was on the pill, she said she couldn't have it. I thought that I never would have agreed to do it if that wasn't the case. You might be able to mitigate your responsibility to some degree. But I don't think that it would necessarily exonerate you completely. But it's also a case where neither party can get off completely. He's on the board of the Free State and my boss. He's your boss. What do you do? What do you think of Ron DeSantis? Well, I think he's a horrible Zionist, but I also think he's been pretty courageous on the lockdown. So, he's like a good conservative. He's half right and half horrible. It does seem like he's positioning himself as a national candidate, and being from Florida, he'd have a good shot. And I would probably prefer him over a lot of people, but also. Lockdown Days is the best account on Twitter. Drew, I'll take your word. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know. Also, how would you approach a woman you plan on having children with who wants to circumcise them? Find a better woman. This is tricky. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm barely I'm not really paying attention to the things. Yufeng donated. Do you know any good books on fascism and the anthropological history of the state? So, not on fascism, not off the top of my head, but anthropological histories of the state. I would recommend Against the Grain and On War by Azar Gott, and also, but Against the Grain is probably my number one pick there. Yeah, I'd have to look back at those two. Against the Grain is probably the best, and it's pretty short. There's others I could name that are more generic, but that's a really good one, Yufeng. So Against the Grain is a good book for that. How would you approach a woman on planning to have children? I would have a very long discussion. Well, first of all, Miguel, one thing you can do that's been shown to be really effective is show them a video of a circumcision. Make them watch a video of a circumcision, and that tends to make most people not be in favor of them. So I would definitely do that. And I would have a very long conversation. There's some good documentaries. American Circumcision is a really good documentary. It tries very hard to be fair, but it's very difficult to walk away with that, not thinking that circumcision is wrong. And I would just learn up all the debates. If you can't just pick a different, better woman, better on that topic anyway, I would just learn as much as you could and have that debate, and eventually I would give them an ultimatum and say that they can't. Just say that they can't. I would, if they refuse, I would tell the doctor, I'm not consenting to this. And that's interesting. What do the doctors do if the parents disagree? You're going to have to disagree and find out. Yeah. That's a fucking, dude. Yeah. That's all I can say. Not that I'm an expert on what you should say to women, but. What's the major difference between Yarvin and Hoppe? I don't know Yarvin, so I can't say. What do you think about DeSantis banning critical race theory in Florida? Yeah, that's good. Critical race theory is totally bogus. Now, public schools are bogus in general, but, if they can cut out one bad thing, I guess I'm not going to complain. There are a variety of questions is refreshing to see. Yeah, I mean, I think we're drilling down on a couple topics quite regularly. Do you think most people are pro-abortion out of convenience? Didn't want a child? Why do these people just laugh when you say, I think abortion is homicide, like you just said the earth is flat? This is interesting. I don't know why this became such a rallying cry. I think part of it is that a lot of them are Malthusian, and they think that killing children is good for the earth. I also think a lot of it is that they do, for unusual reasons that don't necessarily seem obvious, tie it with women's liberation and women's rights. And I guess I could see that, right? A woman who can kill her child is freer from, having to deal with that. So I guess, but you could just kill your child too. That would also be liberating. So why are they drawing the line there? And of course, a few of them don't draw the line there. So it just has become like a battle cry, like a keystone event. It's like gun control for conservatives. Yeah, I don't because the arguments for it are really, really bad. They're quite they are talking about killing a human life. Now they want to call it other euphemisms, bag of cells, a fetus, a zygote, whatever. But everyone knows what's really being discussed. So it's a hard sell, and it's getting to be a harder and harder sell. And there's the macabre argument that the people who are pro-abortion kill their children, and so over the generations, like, weed themselves out ideologically. I don't know if that's actually true. There would be certain poetic justice to that, I suppose. On War by who? By Azar Gat. Azargat. Azar Gat. It might be On War or War and Human Civilization. But look up Azar Gat. Azargat. Azar Gat. He's an Israeli thinker and military historian. In the example where a woman lies about taking birth control, are you still liable even though you entered the interaction under false circumstances? Yeah, buyer beware. Maybe less liable. Look, there could be an argument to be made there. I missed the beginning of the stream, so maybe you already addressed this, but what do you think about the bishop, about Tho Bishop and him becoming the vice chair of the local GOP to help the liberty movement? I don't know Tho Bishop, so I can't answer that. I did not address it, though, so you didn't miss anything. You think most conservatives support gun control without thinking about it? Most conservatives support gun rights, I think. I always felt that way, like they don't understand the connection to the fear of standing armies, pro-military. Yeah, that's a good one, because, like, among the rhetoric of, like, the NRA and the GOA and even the GOP is sometimes explicit and sometimes very much implies the idea of, like, you know, tree of liberty and fighting tyranny. Part of the problem is when they say tyranny, that I guess a lot of people don't take that to, obviously that would be your government. Like, what are you talking about? The tyranny of a gang, the tyranny of a mass shooter? Like, I guess you could call those tyrannical, but that is not what is meant by that. So I do think that lots of conservatives are schizophrenic on this, right? They like to wave the flag and they love the military and they love the police to more or less extent. And then they're like, you know, we need the Second Amendment to defend our rights. From who? And there are some who do know that. There's definitely right-wing people who understand that and are aware of that explicitly so. And there's many others who have cognitive dissonance there, let's just to put it mildly. Nassim Taleb posted a Bitcoin black paper proving Bitcoin has zero value. Okay. Can you think of anything good Biden has done? No, I can't. I'm not saying he hasn't, but I can't think of anything. What do you think about Bill Cosby's sexual assault conviction getting overturned? I don't know the details of why that happened, so I can't say. One little thought experiment as to when life begins is for us to think of when we consider life to have ended. Most people would consider that the end of brain activity. Right, and so there are people who say that it shouldn't be conception, it should be the first brainwave or the first heartbeat. Those are not bad debates to have. The problem is that they would basically outlaw almost all abortion because it's very likely that stuff starts pretty early in development. I don't remember exactly, but all of that starts in the first trimester, I believe. And so most people would not be able to catch it early enough to have an abortion if that was the metric. And if that's the case, then I fully support that. But I do think it makes the most sense to do it at conception. It's alive at that point. I feel like that's like not really controversial. And not only is it alive, but it is a Homo sapien. It's a human life at that point. And it's not a clone of its mother. It's not a clone of the father. It's a unique individual, or two individuals if it's twins. So I'm open to drawing the line someplace else, but the the most obvious, the most clear-cut line, I think, is conception. It seems like it's the easiest, but you know, there is an argument to be made with the heartbeat or the brain, but not birth. That's ridiculous. Hey, can I have your email? No. I just found you recently watching your video on lack of communal showers and would like to discuss my experience with you and outreach. Okay, Jonathan Holcomb, I will not give you my email, but go onto Reddit and look up the communal shower subreddit. There's a whole bunch that are just porn ones that say like communal shower USA, communal shower California, not those. Just look up the communal shower subreddit, look up my username. It's the same as my YouTube name. And there's 6,000 people on there, and we'd be happy to have you share your experiences. You want to just message me personally, or you want to post in the group. That is what that is for. I started that subreddit 2 or 3 years after I made that video. So if you're interested in reaching out to me that way, I don't give out my email, but people who message me on Reddit, I'll see it that way. The police are the ones coming for your guns, yet they worship the police. Yes. They're coming for your guns. They're kicking you out of church. They're doing all the things that they think are bad, and yet they don't blame the cops. The cops are just doing their jobs. I think love for the military comes from back in the day when traditional conservatives aesthetics deeply involved in the military, especially before democracy started. I think it really is largely a 20th century phenomenon. The military was not seen in all that positive light for the 19th century. And for the most part, there are exceptions there. There were a couple generals who were very popular and got elected president, for instance, George Washington being the most obvious example. But, you know, John Taylor, a couple others, Zachary Taylor. But we've had 2 world wars and a Cold War and a massive amount of propaganda in movies and television and just straight up propaganda about the glories of the army and the glories of the military and the Navy and all the things that they did and defeating fascism and the Nazis and the Japanese, and we're raised on that. Like, you know, you talk about boomers today, they grew up on that. They grew up watching John Wayne and all that. And that has a big effect, you know. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, you know, I thought the army was awesome. You know, I remember the first Gulf War and thinking that was so fucking cool. Wow, we're just kicking those Iraqis' butt. Did I know where Iraq was on the map? Did I know anything about the politics of their dispute with Kuwait or the war with Iran or the back dealings that the United States was having, or that the Americans were facilitating their using of gas against the Kurds? No, I didn't know any of that. I just thought it was fucking cool that we had, you know, tanks and planes and bombers and all these laser-guided satellite bombs were, you know, hitting these targets, and it was just awesome. And we just blah, 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 blah. That just appeals to people, you know, and you get indoctrinated enough to it, you know, just inculcate it, and then, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, the end of brain activity ends like activity is the end of human potential. It's like a completely different situation. Yeah, that's a totally fair counterpoint. Like when you die, that's it, and like there is no potential to go further. But like before you have brain activity as a cell, as a zygote or whatever, you are developing, and there's a high potential. Obviously, many die on their own through miscarriages, but there's a high potential that you will. It's almost like if things go well, then that is exactly what is going to happen, and you're just preventing that from ever happening when you take, say, a morning after pill, for instance. Compulsory public schooling is a big factor in love of the military. I don't know if it's the biggest, Drew, but like that's definitely part of it. We all say the Pledge of Allegiance every fucking day. At least I don't know, but no, I did. I had to, and it's regimented, and it's basically a big indoctrination prison. What are your thoughts on Robert Taft, so-called Mr. Republican who was strongly against interventionism? I heard he was a big asshole, actually. So there were conservatives after the New Deal who hated the New Deal and wanted to undo the New Deal, and he was one of them. And they were thwarted by the likes of Dwight Eisenhower, who in other ways was a good president. Not the worst that we've had by any means. Rather enlightened, actually, when it came to foreign policy and a couple issues. and the military, believe it or not. But they caved on all the big stuff, Social Security, and you know, he also died. Like, it's hard to. He died prematurely. He was going to run for president, and then he got cancer and died. And I think he did run for president, but he still died pretty young, like I think in 54 or 55. So, yeah, I mean, as far as Republicans go, he's not bad, but you always have great ideas. Well, thank you. Even Hitler said the military is the highest form of socialism. Yeah, and I remember seeing like a rapper on television who was pro-socialist, and he's like, "Look, the military is socialist, and you love that." So, and people are like indignant, "No, the military is not socialist." Yeah, it is. It's socialist. You know, boop. Are you into crypto at all? Yeah, a little bit. I said I bought Bitcoin at Porcfest in 2012. So if you want to look at how much it cost back then, started to get into it and realized the Bitcoin community is super toxic. Well, there's a lot of partisans. There's a lot of partisanship in there, and there's a lot of people who love or hate this or that coin. Bitcoin has its proponents and its detractors, and very often never the twain shall meet, and I just don't get that involved in it to care. I also think, though, if you got in early, it was fine, but unless you're really going to research it and get really deeply into it, which I have not, you're just speculating and gambling, and I would not recommend people do that unless it's with amounts of money that you can afford to lose. I've learned about your channel by Googling George Fitzhugh. Very amusing book. Yeah, okay, so I should read his other book. But yeah, Fitzhugh is quite one of those authors that deserves to be better known. There's another YouTube channel called The Broke Capitalist. I don't know if he's watching now, but he's watched in the past, and he's covered that stuff in great detail. It's funny. We got the 1519 Project and Juneteenth and all this stuff, and slavery, and then nobody actually wants to read about fucking slavery. Like nobody wants to actually learn what the slave owners thought, how they argued, what their opinions were, or the abolitionists for that matter, or even the slaves. Right? They're not making people read My Bondage, My Freedom, or any of that stuff, or even fictional things like Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's all, here's this modern day communist Marxist who's going to lecture you about slavery, and they don't even know what year the Civil War ended. Fitzhugh is fascinating. I think I did a video where I started to go through quotes. His book was so the reason he was so interesting is he considered slavery the true form of socialism, the truest form of socialism, and therefore good. And he associated capitalism with emancipation and freedom, and therefore was bad. So his quote, he was a very good writer. Like the turns of phrase were amazing, and the way he would critique capitalism, like you would show the things he said about capitalism, and anybody on the left today would be like, "Oh, this is brilliant. This is great. Is this Karl Marx?" Like, no, this is George Fitzhugh, the greatest trumpeter of slavery that there ever was. I have gold, silver, Bitcoin, and altcoins, and I don't understand why people limit themselves to just one thing. There is no reason to limit yourself to just one thing, and that's absolutely true. What are the 3 great political books you would recommend for someone just getting into politics? I would recommend, first, The Problem with Political Authority by Michael Huemer. First, I would then probably say For New Liberty by Rothbard and Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman. Those would be the 3. You turn all the arguments around. Yeah, and it's also true, like, at the time when Fitzhugh was writing in the late 1850s, that a lot of Southerners were not sure what to think. Because on the one hand, they definitely liked that he was defending slavery. And on the other hand, they were uncomfortable with his endorsement of socialism. but he was the best that they had. They didn't really have, like, slavery really, it seems like a lot of Southerners will self-consciously seem to be aware that, like, wow, are we really sure this is right? And yes, there were Bible verses they could quote, which they did, but the counter arguments seemed like they really did seem like they were, quote, going against history. And even the ones who I think really did truly believe it was good had some doubts about it. And there's evidence this may have been one of the reasons why the Civil War just kind of collapsed when it did, is they just decided. They had a couple. If you read Why the South Lost the War, it's a really good book. I think I did a review on it. They talk about how they had a couple big defeats: Gettysburg, Vicksburg. Actually, those are the two big ones. A few others, and they thought, "Oh, God must be punishing us. Why would God be punishing us?" And like, "Oh, maybe that's why." Like, immediately they thought. I'm not saying this, but many of them were like, "Oh, it's probably that." So you had a lot of people arguing necessary evil type things, like, well, what are we going to do? They're going to cause a lot of problems. The white labor is going to be outcompeted. They're illiterate. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They listed all these, a lot of them are true arguments, right? But they weren't coming out and saying slavery is great. Slavery is a good thing. If you've ever seen the Invincible comic, there's a scene where, like, Omni-Man is telling them, look, the Earth being conquered by Viltrum is a good thing. Like, you can tell he honestly believes the conquest of the Earth by this alien empire is a good thing. You didn't have that many people arguing that, so forcefully, and Fitzhugh was, and so he got a lot of play, but it was tied in. Apparently he had read Marx, which this is, I think, before even Das Kapital had even been published, so he was reading very early Marx. And probably some other earlier socialists, and they weren't sure what to think of him. But like, you read that stuff, it's fucking bonkers. Like, the way he criticizes, I think I only read like 60 pages of that book, and I pulled like 40 or 50 amazing quotes out of it. Like, it's really, really good. And I would recommend. I should probably finish it, to be honest. I've never heard that approach to the topic of slavery before. People do skip questioning everyone involved at the time. That's a good point. Look, you all know I'm a big history buff, and I find that stuff fascinating anyway, but I did make a concerted effort several years ago to say, look, this is a big issue. It's going to be, I didn't realize it was going to become such a woke thing. I wanted to learn about slavery in the United States as much as I could. And I have an entire bookshelf dedicated to that, and other aspects of the Civil War as well. And that stuff is so valuable. That's like golden ammunition in these debates about the legacy of slavery and all that. People don't know what the fuck they are talking about. They are completely in la la land. Like, the stuff that they say is so wrong and so ignorant and so easy to deconstruct but people just don't, because they didn't take the time, right? So, and I've done lots of book reviews and recommended stuff that people should read on that, because there's really, really good stuff. And this is not like stuff that's written to debate woke people. These are just really good history books that walk through it, and then you get stuff like the half will never be told, which is just shoddy, ridiculous research, but then it becomes a New York Times bestseller by a guy who's not even a historian, and then they'll come and say, oh, look, this guy says that blah, blah, blah. And, if you hadn't read enough on your own, you can be pulled over by that stuff, right? If you don't know enough on your own, you can be fooled a lot easier, or misled, or whatever. Are you still into Bigfoot? I've been going down that rabbit hole. Yeah, I don't actively do it, but yeah, I'm still interested in Bigfoot, so... I haven't made a video on it in like 8 years, though. I feel like among libertarians on the topic of crypto, it's just inflation is theft. And if you disagree, you're a statist and a thief. And I think inflation is theft. So, but that goes way past crypto, because that's gold. That's, a whole bunch of other topics. What do you think of Michael Malice's talk on anarchism? Is there value in reading less proprietarians like Proudhon and Centra? I'm sure there is value in it, but it's up to everyone else to decide. what the marginal utility is, right? How valuable is it to you, right? If you're working a really hard job and you don't have any time to do any research, yeah, you probably don't want to spend time reading, some lesser known leftist anarchist. If you've got some time to invest and you're really interested in the ideas, why not? Yeah. I tweeted I would have supported the South during the Civil War and got mixed reactions. What are your thoughts on you supporting the South or the mixed reactions? Right. I mean, it's a tricky position, right? So I'm pretty strongly anti-slavery, and I think that slavery was definitely supported by the federal government and by the state governments even more. On the other hand, I think secession is legal, and I think that launching a war to prevent it, and here's the thing, it's a little easier than people think, because the North did not. If you've ever seen the Office episode where Michael goes, "Don't be racist," as Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't be racist or I will attack you with the North." It's a funny joke, but it's not funny in the sense that like millions of people basically believe that's what happened, that the North went to war to free slavery, and that's ridiculous. Were there abolitionists in the North? Yes, and many abolitionists at first initially said, okay, let them leave. We don't want no union with the slave power. That had been a abolitionist slogan on the Liberator for like a decade or more. No union with slave power. Let them leave. It can't last without our subsidy, which is probably true. Debatable, but probably true. And they came around on this as the war progressed and as the Lincoln administration became more avowedly anti-slavery, which they were not at first. It was clearly about keeping the Union together, preventing secession, and he said very explicitly in the Emancipation Proclamation, this big thing that people have never read and imagine all this stuff, if you come back to the Union, you get to keep your slaves. Boom. And they exempted all the areas that were under Union control, the entire state of Tennessee, most of Louisiana, most of Northern Virginia, right? Any place that the Union controlled that still had slaves was exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation by name. Like they named the counties. So like it's not what people think. There were some people in the North who were eager to fight the war because they felt that it would end slavery. Yes, there were a few, but it was very few. You've got the Joshua Lawrence Chamberlains and a few other people like that. It was not the motivation. It's not what Lincoln said he was doing. It's not why they were raising hundreds of thousands of volunteers. It was to stop secession. And the thing is, secession is almost certainly legal. It's almost certainly implied by the Constitution. And what ended there? The Union ended. We talk about the Union in the South, but no one talks about the Union now, and no one talks about the Union after the Civil War, because there is no Union. Union is when people agree to come together. It is now an empire. You got married, and the person said they were going to divorce, and you beat the crap out of them and chain them into your basement. And like, yeah, it's not a union anymore. It's an abduction at this point. And that's what we have. Now, there's some complication here because the Southerners were really bad in all these other ways. As if there wasn't slavery in parts of the North, there was. As if there wasn't white supremacy in the North, there definitely was. And discrimination in the North, there definitely was. Genocide in the North. I mean, Lincoln did the largest mass execution of Lakota Indian. The largest mass execution in the United States history was Lakota Indians, Seton Lakota, who had rebelled in Minnesota, and Lincoln had them put to death. I think 68, something like that, at once, all hung at once. Not to mention what they did to all the other tribes. So it wasn't a good guys versus bad guys. There's a lot of problems with the South. They weren't this lost cause narrative where they're just these perfect angels. Blah, blah, blah. That's false. But yeah, I would not support a war like that. If you really felt that way about slavery, then you should do what John Brown did. Okay, so John Brown had the right idea. Everybody else was wrong. If you read an excellent book on this topic that filled my library with its bibliography, basically, is Freeing Slaves, Enslaving Free Men. Freeing Slaves, Enslaving Free Men. I think it's by something Hummel or Rummel. Don't remember. Excellent analysis. Excellent book. Not a long book either. Really well reviewed by other mainstream Civil War historians too. So Yeah. Do you think James Longstreet was an underrated general, a better defensive commander? But obviously, no. Stonewall, of course. Well, I don't think he's underrated. He is famous and well known. And what did Robert E. Lee called him? My old war horse. He thought very highly of him. There is a school of thought that he was even more ahead of his time, and there are people who say that someone like Stonewall Jackson was just wrong. That they were fighting that Lee and Longstreet were fighting a campaign that the South could not sustain and therefore not win, whereas Longstreet was. So he is well regarded. He was hated in the South after the war because he became a Republican. Actually, half his memoirs, I haven't read them yet, though. So he's highly regarded, but you could argue that he deserves more praise than that. Do you think all the controversy on public schools teaching critical race theory is an attempt to give the federal government more control over state and public? No, I think that's just a genuine discrete. Does the federal government want more control? Yes, it does. I don't think it's using that, though. But, it could be wrong. Good books on slavery. Well, I just mentioned one, Freeing Slaves and Enslaving Free Men. What's the name? If you look back, there's a video I did a review on one, a really good one. American Slavery, American Freedom. The Half Has Never Been Told is not very good. I would read it, but you'd have to read real history books in conjunction with it. What is the one? You can look back in the videos. I did a video on it. Let's see if I can see that. There's one really good one that I could come right off the top of my bat videos. Oh my goodness. A whole bunch of videos of me going to a nude beach. Sorry, guys. Looks like I didn't name the video that. But if you watch my video titled The 1619 Project, or what's another one? Capitalism, Socialism, Slavery. I know it's right on my desk. It's like in my other room. Gosh, look at all these videos from a year ago. I need to go on a diet. Jesus. It's funny what stuff like people watch and what things people don't. Yeah, let me get right back on that. I'll be right back. Oh, shit. Okay, since I ran to the library, I got more than one. So the one I was thinking of, American Slavery, American Freedom. This one right here, American Slavery, American Freedom by Edmund Morgan. Highly recommend this book. It talks about the development of slavery from the first Virginia colony, how it developed, how it started as kind of an extension of feudalism into a more racialized economic capitalist slavery. Excellent book. I think this is from the 70s. A contemporary book, The Cotton Kingdom, Frederick Law Olmsted. This was published, I think, in the 1850s. So this is a great classic if you want to read about slavery at the time. Roll, Jordan, Roll, The World the Slaves Made, by, what does that say? Fugner Genovese? Eugene Genovese. Okay, Eugene Genovese. Very good one. Competition and Coercion, Blacks in the American Economy, 1865 to 1914, by Robert Higgs. The amazing Robert Higgs, who's one of those guys you can be Facebook friends with. Slavery and the Numbers Game, A Critique on Time of the Cross. Here, let's get that one too. So we've got two. So there's been a lot of academic research about was slavery profitable, all that sort of stuff. And Time on the Cross is one of the eminent books on that, Economics of American Negro Slavery. And this is a critique of Time on the Cross, slavery and the numbers game. So it's like you read both sides of the argument. Is good for you. This is the Dred Scott case. This is the seminal work on that very important, maybe the most important Supreme Court case ever, because it probably led to the Civil War. And this is about a particular case, but it goes into the legal standing of slavery and its history and this particular case. So, you know, this is probably the most important case in the U.S. history, so it is worth knowing about. And I read this book years ago. Really, really good. And then African slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this was an excellent book. It's a short book, and I used this almost immediately. I read this book and ended up on a date with a Harvard communist who started trying to tell me that Boston was built by slavery. And I was like, would you say that if we were in Brazil? And he said, no. I was like, but Brazil had more black slaves for a longer time, started before and ended after. So why is Boston guilty and Brasilia not? Why is Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo fine, and Lisbon for that matter, but not Boston, where there were never many slaves and almost nothing that's in Boston today was built by slaves? And he had no fucking answer, because he hadn't read a fucking book even though he'd been to Harvard. Anyway, there you go. But that first one is the one I recommend the most. Boop, boop, boop. Oh my God, I'm so far behind. Would you give an example of a bad argument on slavery, such as bad is why it was bad or bad is why it was good? I'm not sure. My argument was that I would support any secessionist movement regardless of their reasons for seceding, and that's a fair argument. When I went on Larry Sharp's show, I argued on if Lincoln was a tyrant or not. I said yes, of course. He was a tyrant. I think he would even agree that he was a tyrant. I think he saw. I do really hate Lincoln, but I also think that he really thought he was doing the right thing, and that he thought, look, my job is to preserve the Union, and I have all this incredible power vested in me for that reason, and that's what I'm going to do. I don't think he used that power because he was corrupt. I don't think he used that power because he wanted to be famous. This is in stark contrast with somebody, say, like FDR, who I think absolutely, he just wanted to be a great president. He would have nuked every city in Europe if he thought it would make him a more famous president. And fortunately, he died before they had a nuke, because otherwise he may have done that. But Lincoln was a tyrant. Lincoln suppressed the press. He suppressed habeas corpus. He led but he ordered vast armies to crush an insurrection. He had his political rivals in the North imprisoned, expelled, drafted, whatever else. And he wasn't all bad. He seemed to have been fairly magnanimous. He didn't want to execute everyone in the South. They executed only one person. Surprising after a civil war of that violence that they just said, let's all just be friends again. But how can you really, and, I guess it's good that they didn't massacre all their families and everything, but that doesn't make it okay. And then to pretend that he is an abolitionist and that he launched the war to save black people. There's a really good book. I didn't bring it out, Drew, but I thought about it. Forced into Glory. And it's by a black guy, a black reporter. And some of the stuff in that book is a little shaky, but by and large, you get the gist. Lincoln was quite a white supremacist. He said he was explicitly many times. Every historian knows the stuff that he said, not only in the Lincoln-Douglas debate, but in the State of the Unions, right? Where he says, if I could keep the Union together and free no slaves at all, I would do that. If I could keep the Union together by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. If I could preserve the Union by freeing some slaves and keeping others in bondage, I would do that. It was completely secondary to, quote, preserving the Union. And it's not a union of force. It's not a union of the sword. I did a video a couple years ago, look it up, called A Union of the Sword. Okay, and there were this view where people, when they were debating it before the Civil War, they loved the Union, equality and union forever, freedom and union forever, right? All these nationalists in the United States, we didn't have a central state so much as a union of sovereign states, and people then loved the Union. But the reason they loved the Union, the reason the Union was good, the reason the Union was a wonderful thing is that it was a voluntary union. That these different sovereign states, Massachusetts, Virginia, Georgia, Kentucky, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, these sovereign states, these independent and different places, right, with different cultures and different economics and different ideologies, which they had, they'd come together and say, let's all work in the common defense to defend our own freedom and prosperity. Okay, that sounds really cool. That sounds like, there are obviously problems with that. It wasn't perfect by any means. But that was the idea. And not an empire, not we conquer you and force you to become part of our nation, part of our empire. And that is what happened. The American empire was born the day that Lincoln called for troops and people answered in 1861. That is when the American empire was born, and that is when the founding fathers and the Constitution all essentially died. That we still celebrate them and talk about them, and their stuff is in the documents, but that is when we became an American empire. And then we became a world empire in the 20th century. And so, if you have a relationship and it's a beautiful relationship and then it starts to go sour, it's understandable to feel like you don't want it to end and you get frantic to stop it from ending. But that doesn't mean that you can do anything to keep it together. You beg, you persuade, you change yourself, you do whatever you can, but you don't fucking kidnap them and lock them away and beat the shit out of them and then say, oh good, the Union was saved. No. The Union is dead. You just destroyed it. And maybe it should have, right, maybe it should have died. And, was there venality and cowardice and hypocrisy and evil on the part of the South? Yes, all those things are true. All those things are true. They're also true for the North. Sometimes they differ in degree, sometimes worse, sometimes less, right? But, the nuance of that's just completely lost. Is there any reason for the black bar to the right of your screen? I just don't know how to format stuff correctly. I think that would show comments and stuff there, but no. Isn't the non-intervention position similar to the Prime Directive in Star Trek? I think the Prime Directive goes way farther than that, but they basically ignored it in every episode. My favorite vids are yours on the French Utopian. I don't know what you're talking about. The French Utopian. Books are for nerds. You think the divide between the races can be healed, or are we going to be at odds with each other for more generations? I think it definitely can. I'm not saying that it will, but I think that it definitely can. I've noticed that a lot of the woke crowd seem to ignore the fact that we're black. That there were black slaveholders. There weren't a ton. There definitely were. Louisiana had its fair share, and we definitely have documented cases of them in places like Virginia. They definitely were a minority, but I think even worse, blacks were very much involved in the slave trade. One of the big misconceptions is that Europeans would like land on the coast of Africa and send out a party of white guys with guns and nets and cages and catch black people the way that like the Pound catches dogs. And maybe that's because that's how they show it in the TV show Roots. And that is ridiculous. That like never happened. The only Europeans who ever caught any slaves on their own were the Portuguese, and it was very, very rare. What pretty much always happened is various African states and principalities and chieftainships would engage in war with each other or commerce with each other, and they would capture or buy or in other ways acquire slaves, and then they would bring them to marketplaces where they would be sold, directly or indirectly to Europeans. So, every black person who made it across the Middle Passage, there was another black person at least who sold them and took the money and profited directly on those slaves. And so it's not like all the profits from slavery gave birth to capitalism in Boston and Lowell and Manchester. No, a lot of the profits in slavery went to Sierra Leone and Lagos and Cote d'Ivoire and all these ports on the Congo and the Niger and the Gold Coast, right? And nobody who talks about the reparations for slavery ever even acknowledges, like they just refuse to even factor that basic reality into their worldview. And it's stupid. It's absolutely... They won't even do it against other slave-owning societies in North America. So they won't criticize Cuba. They won't criticize the Dominican Republic. They won't criticize Mexico. People think Mexico didn't have slavery. Mexico abolished slavery in the 1820s, but they had it the whole time before that. There were still slaves alive in Mexico when the United States annexed all that territory in the Mexican-American War. And Brazil had slavery starting in the 1500s and ending in 1888. 1888. And it was like 90% of the slaves did not end up in North America. They went to Latin America. And these self-flagellating communists who have never had a real job and live off of the fucking trust fund at Harvard will go around saying we should all feel guilty in New England, but the people in Angola and Sierra Leone and Lisbon and Brasilia and Rio de Janeiro and Havana shouldn't give a damn. It's just completely hypocritical and stupid. And they just never get pushback on that because nobody knows anything. Do you see any similarities between Lincoln and Otto von Bismarck? A few, but not many. Bismarck is usually considered the greatest politician who ever lived. And most of the union of Germany came about through war, but not war against those parts, war against other parts. So they fought wars against Austro-Hungary and Denmark and France. They did not invade Bavaria, though. So it's not good, but he wasn't invading those countries to make them part of Germany. It's a little bit different too, in that those other German states had never been part of Prussia. They were joining Prussia. They were joining a Hanseatic League or whatever, and slowly becoming incorporated. They weren't seceding in that sense, and he did not invade those. He invaded other states, including a nominally German state in Austro-Hungary, Denmark, and France, and then used those wars to weld them together. The other thing too is he seemed it seemed like if they had followed his advice, there probably never would have been a World War One. But who's keeping score? They had to do what the military wanted, and the military wanted to take Alsace and Lorraine from France, and so they did, which made France their enemy, which meant they had to have a three-front war against France, Russia, and the UK 40 years later. Oh my God, did I catch up? Yeah, you guys having a debate that I just didn't follow. Holy shit. Oh my God, you guys. It has been 1 hour and 56 minutes. So, you got final questions? Let's see if we can wrap this up in the next 4 minutes. 3 minutes, sorry. This might be rose-colored glasses, me being too young, but I think the racial divide is largely healed in the 2000s and fell apart in the 2010s. Yeah, I don't think that's wrong. I think that race relations were getting better and better and better, and like they've deteriorated recently, but I don't think that there's anything really systemic. That's the thing. I don't think there's anything systemic, and so I think that this can go away. It's not like we've got Jim Crow or slavery to act as something that's really a wedge issue. We don't really have that. And they're trying to generate racial animosity over a whole bunch of issues that aren't really racial, right? Trans bathrooms and whatnot. And I just don't know how much that's going to excise people, right? Marshall Forward. Are you not really named Marshall Forward? I feel like I know who you really are if you're going to call me king. Obama ruined race. Well, Obama was a race hustler for sure. He used it to his political advantage, where at the same time claiming he was going to be above that. Absolutely not. And the most outstanding example of that is the Trayvon Martin hoax, where, sad situation, but guy, teenager attacks watchman, beats the crap out of him, gets warned, gets killed. Classic self-defense. End of story. And then Obama comes down and goes, yeah, justice wasn't done, and Zimmerman has to go through a whole trial, which he is acquitted in, and boom, we get the whole start of like the BLM movement and a whole new generation of race hustlers like Ben Crumb, who somehow managed to represent both Trayvon's family and George Floyd, and anywhere, anytime any black person dies in a way that looks bad in the media, Ben Crumb will fucking show up. Agreed. Thanks for the live stream. Had fun. Thanks for watching. Dude called someone like Trayvon Martin would have been his son. Yeah. If Trayvon Martin ever hit up one of his daughters, he would have told her, well, first of all, that would never happen because they went to Harvard and private school, and so they never would have met Trayvon. How do you retain all your information you do? Do you take notes? Do you read the same books multiple times? I don't take notes except in extremely rare cases. One of the exceptions is when I read George Fitzhugh's book, and the only time I did that was because I wanted to quote those quotes in a video, which I did. My memory is good, but it's not perfect. I certainly do not have anything like a photographic memory, but I will say I don't reread books unless it's Game of Thrones. I did reread that once, but that's it. But I would say that if you cover the same topic over and over again, you encounter the same information over and over again, and you start to learn it better. So if you read about, just as an example, if you read lots of history books on World War II or the Pacific War in particular, you will probably end up reading about the Battle of Midway. And sometimes you might read about it where it's just a couple lines, and sometimes you might read about it where it's just a chapter, and sometimes you might read about it where it's just a book. And then you'll see it in a documentary, and then you'll see it, and eventually you'll end up knowing, a lot about the Battle of Midway, a lot more than you would know if you only glanced over it once. And I just use that as an example, but the same could be said of slavery, about the Civil War. Just the more you expose yourself to, and there's an idea, I don't know if this is still true, it's one of the few things I learned in college. You have this idea of schema, where you have nodes of information, and they're kind of like self-supporting. So like if you have a topic that you don't know anything about, let's say you don't know anything about the ancient Sumerians, and I tell you one fact, like that the Sumerian word for king is Lugal. That's the only thing you know. Lugal, nothing else. But then you learn another fact, that they developed writing, or that they spoke a language isolate, or that one of the first kings was called Lugash, or the Epic of Gilgamesh. You start putting them all together, and they become mutually supporting. So just the more widely and deeply you read, the more you're going to know. And if there's topics that I've gone over a lot, and I'm pretty conversant in, whether the slavery, the Civil War, World War II, libertarianism, economics, there's a couple things that I've gone over a lot. There's other things that I've only gone over a little bit. So like if we were going to have a conversation about, it's even hard to list the things that you don't know because they're not in your head to know, right? But like there's lots of things that, you'd be a lot shakier on. So just exposing yourself as much as possible to as much as possible. And they start to sound familiar, like the story. And I do think of history as a series of stories. And the more times you go over the stories and the more stories you have in parallel together, the better you can piece it together. Are you satisfied with your YouTube subscriber popularity status and stuff? No, I'm not. It fucking barely ever grows. It hasn't grown at all. The views, like, they're not pathetic. It's not like I'm speaking to nobody. But, no video I've made has ever gone viral or even close to viral. The ones that have done well will get a few tens of thousands of views over an extended period of time. That's good. I mean, that's certainly like there's an audience. It's just not a huge audience, and it's not really growing at any marginal rate. And, I know a lot of that is me. A lot of that is me just not being regular. A lot of me is not putting in production value, because that's the thing now. You want to have high production value. It's going to sound like it's lazy, but like, why would I put in 5 or 6 or 10 times the work when the arguments are exactly the same, right? Like the things that I'm going to say, the points I'm trying to convey are identical, but it would take me that much longer. And I guess the argument is, and it's not a bad one, I suppose, well, more people would watch and you'd have more you'd have more of an audience than you currently do. The audience is okay. It's not like pathetically small or anything like that. It's enough that I'll bump into people who know who I am at Porcfest anyway. But it's like, it is what it is. Like, I don't want to put in... I would rather go and read a book or go to the gym or go hiking or hypnotize a twink or whatever else than spend 5 hours like editing a video. And especially when it's not going to add one more point or one less point to what I'm going to say. And so I don't. So I don't have a studio. I don't edit anything hardly ever. And if I do, it will be like a single edit. And so, yeah, it's like this weird middle ground. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not great. It's funny because I've had a couple of guys who not even guys, even girls who like my stuff and got inspired by me, and they have channels that are bigger than me, so, whatever. But, he has a podcast, and I don't know why, but like the views on the podcast just shot up the last week. I have no idea why that is. Your soul read, but other channels have so much more views, but you have no editing production value. Yeah, that's probably it. The sad story, John Wayne, is that's probably... I mean, I guess I'm going to say that's it. Maybe there's something about me, like I'm shitty or ugly or I have verbal tics or who knows what it is. But the problem, at least part of it, is that, yeah, there's no production value. It's just, I just vlog. I live stream it, or maybe I record it and upload it later. I've done a couple videos like those book reviews of Robert Caro's books, where I'll take out some pictures and I'll show pictures of some of that, because that's pretty easy. I can do that in 5 or 10 minutes, and that adds a little bit to the video. But that's about it. Maybe it's my excuse. I don't know. But like, what am I going to do all that and then the arguments are the same? Right, I feel like people should be able to understand that. And the other thing too, I think there's a strength in like, they're not edited. There are no jump cuts. That's just me talking straight up. So I'm good at doing that. I don't need to let me edit all my points together one by one by one. And I think that's good. I feel more comfortable doing that. I almost feel like it would be disingenuous to deliver stuff in a chopped up, edited, highly erroneous way. Maybe that's not fair, but that's kind of how I feel. he's nice to listen to. I get told that a lot, but I am a hypnotist, so. We started Discord for you and your fans. The podcast is just the Length Unither show, so just look it up. I think I used to put links in the descriptions. It's been a few months since I made a video, but there's, I think, 30 or 40 of them up there. So if you ever want to listen, they're there. I do have a nice new mic, so I should probably like make better use of that. I was trying to record them in my car just because I had so much time I was in the car, but like the quality is just not very good when I do that. I just record them on my phone. I am not autistic, but thank you. The low production value feels more genuine. I appreciate the variety of historical social topics you cover. Found you from researching foreskin restoration. Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things that happened with my channel is I started making videos on foreskin restoration, circumcision, and communal showers. And it brought in a lot of audience that were not libertarians. And I think that's good, right? If somebody agrees with me on foreskin restoration, or circumcision, and I think I'm pretty well spoken on those topics, or communal showers, where I'm apparently like the world authority on that. There's nobody else who even talks about that shit, and to the depth that I do. They'll listen and then like, well, I'm not a libertarian, but you seem like you know what you're talking about when it comes to foreskin or circumcision or whatnot. So maybe I'll give you a listen, and I think that's wonderful, really. Like, you know, it's not that I don't love libertarians and talking to them, but like if you already agree on 95% of your stuff, like, you know, it's just preaching to the choir, which, you know, preaching to the choir isn't bad, but, you know, there's not a huge reason to do it either. I think the regular update frequency hurts you more. My unedited vlogs do about as well as my edited videos. Okay, that's a fair point. So, you know, I am getting to the point now where I probably could do that. And there was a time when I was doing videos pretty regularly. Another problem I have is just a motivation issue where I'm not going to make a video just to make a video. I want to make a video that's something I care about. It shouldn't be that hard in the sense that there's plenty of stuff to talk about. So yeah, I think that's probably a really fair point, Drew, and I will actually try and become more regular, both with the videos and with the podcasts. Like, there's plenty of stuff to talk about. The news is always generating content. Like, I'll definitely do a video about the trans thing because that's an interesting thing, and it's kind of in the news right now. And I feel like having multiple experiences showering with trans people, that, you know, maybe I have a perspective there that people will listen to. I found you in 2011. That's when I started the channel. February 2011 was my first upload. Go back and look at it. I'm fat and hairless and still not even 30 yet. What you did was great back then, but those ideas have been challenged. Thus, people no longer have a common ground. It's sad, but the product of the unending critical theory. Well, there were a lot of ideas in those early videos, and I don't know which of them have been challenged. The first series I did was on gun control. I think my first 30 videos are on gun control. And I thought that I would persuade all of the conservatives that, hey, this guy knows about gun rights and he knows about guns, and they'll listen to me, and then they'll become anarcho-capitalists. And I think that did happen, like, with 2 people. But other than that, no. Is the podcast subsidized? No, I don't have any revenue from it. I pay to have the podcast up. Like, I pay money to have the podcast be up. It's subsidized by my paycheck. That's how it's subsidized. Thank you, Drew. Thank you for watching. Have a great night. Thanks for the advice. I will try and implement that. And thank you, everyone else. Thank you for everyone who donated. I wasn't expecting that. It's nice, a little bonus, but kind of a surprise also. And yeah, thank you all for listening. And if you didn't go to Porcfest this year, try and make plans to go next year. It's going to be awesome. And there's